You know, we put together the coolest little newsletter every single day, or every single weekday, every day that we do our show. And Sue Nethercutt is the editor of it, and she does such a brilliant job with this thing. It's absolutely free, by the way. It's, you know, all you have to do is go over to thomhartmann.com and just sign up for it. Sign up for the free newsletter. And we don't sell the list or share it or any of that kind of stuff. So, you know, it's just coming to you, and that's it. And every day, as we're doing the show, Sue is listening to the show, and she is finding the websites for all the articles and all the stories and all the topics, broadly speaking, that I'm talking about on radio and on TV. And then she puts the links in there. We call it Sue's Daily Stack, and it's literally a link to every article that I've referenced and every broad topic that I've talked about. I think you'll find it really a valuable asset, particularly to help you win the water cooler wars. So be sure to check it out. It's over at thomhartmann.com. It's free. It's our newsletter. Thanks a lot. For the Thom Hartmann Book Club, our book today is How Wealth Rules the World, Saving Our Communities and Freedoms from the Dictatorship of Property by Ben G. Price. With a blurb on the back from some guy named Thom Hartmann. This is from the introduction, One Right to Rule Them All, The Dark Side of Property. Let's get it out in the open. The United States of America, nations that emulate its governing principles, are governed by a dictatorship of property. Is that plutocracy? Sure, but it goes deeper than that. The U.S. Constitution, as it was written and later interpreted by the Supreme Court, hijacked democratic rights that American revolutionaries thought they had won. The Federalists developed a whole system of law that serves the interests of wealth. Elements of that system include the following: state constitutions untethered from their revolutionary moorings, international trade agreements that supersede local, state, and federal laws, regulations administered by an unrepresentative bureaucracy, political parties that gerrymander legislative districts so that they can choose their voters rather than allowing voters to choose their representatives, corporate property that the Supreme Court has declared to be persons with Bill of Rights protections, federal and state statutes that privatize public governance and prohibit democratic limits on the uses of private fortunes, and local governments declared to be property of the state and made unavailable to communities for municipal lawmaking. We live deep within an undemocratic matrix of law that masquerades as a democratic republic while it legalizes an aristocracy of wealth. The U.S. Constitution was written by men who came from a uniformly privileged class. Charles Beard argued this point in his book, An Economic Interpretation of the Constitution of the United States. Beard analyzed the economic interests of those who met in secret to overturn the Articles of Confederation and concluded that the Federalists were motivated by economic self-interest to establish a form of government that would protect their wealth against an excess of democracy, as Alexander Hamilton put it. The Federalists who replaced the Articles with the U.S. Constitution were not fully aligned with the liberating agenda of commoners who risked their lives to throw off the hierarchical chains of Great Britain. They were wealthy men educated in British law with opinions that harmonized with aristocratic sentiments. The authors of the U.S. Constitution are often called the Founding Fathers. Popular history lumps the Federalist counter-revolutionaries in with the likes of Thomas Paine, who with his firebrand writings against monarchy, nobility, and special privilege for the few, inspired the people to demand independence. Popular culture counts the Federalists as American revolutionaries no less fervent for liberty than the men whose ideas of leveling the social class system inspired American farmers and day laborers to pick up their muskets and take on the redcoats. This conflation of the Federalist counter-revolutionaries with those whose spirit of '76 is reflected in the Declaration of Independence and absent from the U.S. Constitution is a troubling reminder that popular history too often preserves false memories. What's the evidence that the Federalists intended a Constitution that weaponizes law to protect the accumulation of property and raise wealth and out of reach of public governance? Well, to begin with, their own words were recorded in Philadelphia in 1787 by James Madison and Robert Yates. Damningly, that record was held secret until every delegate to the clandestine conclave had died and the Constitution they wrote had been the law of the land for 2 generations. We have that evidence, and it tells the tale I'll share in Chapter 2. We also have the product of their cleverness to consider. The Federalists established a quasi-monarchical judiciary. Politically appointed judges wielded the power to veto any legislation that departs from the Federalists' original intent, to protect wealthy accumulation from democratic oversight. We have the arguments of the anti-Federalists who called out the would-be American aristocrats for betraying the Revolution. If not for them, we would not have the first 10 amendments to the Federalist document, the Bill of Rights, which many identify as the soul of the U.S. Constitution. More immediate evidence that the original intent of the U.S. Constitution was to immunize possession of unearned property from public regulation can be found in the antisocial way the document is interpreted by the courts and how it operates on society today. Here's my argument in a nutshell. We are faced with social, political, and environmental problems that resist resolution because law empowers a wealthy minority to govern based on priorities often at odds with the general welfare. The Constitution, and its interpretation by the courts, amounts to an arsenal of weaponized law able to deliver special privileges to a propertied class. Certain legal mechanisms let those seeking to profit at the public expense block policies that compete with their interests. These legal doctrines operate by a 2-step process. First, they remove democratic rights from the public sphere and deposit them in concentrated accumulations of property. The oddity of attaching legal rights to property itself rather than to people roared into public consciousness with the Supreme Court's 2010 Citizens United ruling that affirmed corporate property's personhood and free speech rights. Although the ruling shocked the conscience of average Americans, it was not the first time the court had vested civil rights within inert property. Nor were corporations the first type of property to be given legal rights. The second step is for property imbued with rights to deliver those rights as an extra layer of legal privilege to the property owner. When civil and human rights are deposited in property, that property is placed beyond the authority of the people to govern how it is used by its owner. This nullifies the majority's ability to decide directly or through elected representatives what public policy will be. As a result, we aren't allowed to resolve issues of immediate concern to every community. Even when we understand what needs to be done, we're often blocked. And then he goes through the whole list. Benji Price wrote, How Wealth Rules the World.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Well, happy Monday. Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Boy, what a day. Sometimes it just blows me away where we're at in this point in time. The argument about whether or not Donald Trump should be impeached is, in some ways, a very complex one, and in other ways, it's a very simple one. And, you know, for example, there are multiple, news outlets and whatnot. Thank you. Saying, instead of impeaching him, let's just have a censure resolution. Well, an impeachment investigation, which suddenly turns the House into a courtroom, essentially, and gives the House Judiciary Committee access to things that they wouldn't otherwise have access to, can end up voting to censure rather than to impeach. I mean, it's not an all or nothing, and you don't have to go to the Senate. Excuse me, but pardon me, but you do have to start, right? You have to start somewhere. And this is, for example, Thor Hogan in the Washington Post. He's saying censure, not impeachment, is the proper way to deal with the president's misdeed, because it'll pass either house by a simple majority. It doesn't need the 2/3 in the Senate that impeachment does to remove a president from office. Excuse me. And so, there's that. But, frankly, if you look at the history of the Nixon impeachment, it was, the approval of Nixon and his job started to collapse in May of 73. It was in July, well, it was in August, August 8th, that Nixon resigned. So it took about 3 months. And during those 3 months, support for removing him from office went from 19%, which is where it was in May, during the Watergate hearings, all the way up to 57% on the day that he resigned. So the key to the whole thing is not whether you can win in the Senate or the House. It's whether more than 50% of Americans want Trump removed from office. And frankly, I think that the thing that will cause that to happen, the thing that will wake people up to that, is laying out his crimes. I mean, just laying out what this guy has done. I mean, one of the arguments, for example, that his lawyers are making right now, both the House Judiciary Committee, the House Oversight Committee, and I believe, well, I'm not certain, but anyhow, those two committees, in any case, have subpoenaed Trump's financial records. In one case, his tax returns. In another case, his actual business records, his finance records from his accountant firm, which had said, we'd be glad to give them to you. Just give us a friendly subpoena. Congress did, and now Trump's lawyers are suing, saying, oh, no, you don't. And the argument that they're making is that, yeah, Trump may have committed a crime as a public citizen before he became president. But that's not relevant to what you're looking into. You're looking into whether he committed crimes as president, and therefore you shouldn't have access to his financial records. Do you get how weird this is? I mean, it's beyond weird. It's like a massive dislocation of our priorities. And then you get Rudy Giuliani going on TV over the weekend saying, oh, there's nothing wrong with taking, intelligence from a foreign government and using that in a political campaign. Well, maybe not, but maybe there should be. I think, though, that, the federal law prohibits foreigners from providing anything of value to a campaign in the United States. And I don't know how you could argue, although Bill Barr is arguing this, and the Mueller report was kind of ambiguous about it, how you can argue that stealing Hillary and John Podesta's emails and then releasing them strategically on days when the campaign needed them to be released, how that is not a thing of value. How is that not a thing of value? I mean, if the Koch brothers buy $1 million worth of ads for you, well, frankly, I'd say that's a thing of value, too, and a contribution to the campaign. But, we've got these super PACs and all that kind of stuff. But Rachel Maddow told the story on, I believe it was on Friday, about how, or maybe it was earlier, about how Adlai Stevenson, who ran against, in 1960, who was thinking of running for president, ended up, Adlai Stevenson, well, he was running for president. He was running as a Republican. Russia offered to help him win the White House in 1960, and they held a meeting with him. Excuse me, he was a Democrat. This would have been in the primary. And they held a meeting because John Kennedy ended up being the candidate. They held a meeting with him to offer Moscow's assistance. Stevenson said no. He left the meeting. He went home. He documented every detail he could remember, and then he went to the authorities. 8 years later, the Soviet Union offered the same thing to Hubert Humphrey, and he said no. I mean, we have a history here. But this tipping point, this is a really important thing. I think that I said this several times last week, but I'll repeat it again. When Bill Clinton was impeached, when the House decided to look into the crimes of Bill Clinton, they didn't find any crimes, right? They tried to say that he was involved in a corrupt land deal 35 years earlier. Turned out he was just a victim of it. They tried to say that his wife was a bad lawyer. Turned out she was a great lawyer. They tried to say it was illegal for Hillary Clinton to have fired somebody in the travel office. Turned out it was perfectly fine. It was a normal part of business in the White House. This was just more faux outrage, from the Republicans. And every single one of these things were part of, essentially what became an impeachment inquiry. And then finally they discovered that, he'd had sex with Monica Lewinsky. And it turns out he hadn't actually had what and is generally regarded as sex, that is, intercourse. He did not have that with Monica Lewinsky, which is why Bill Clinton thought he could lie and say, no, I didn't have sex with that woman. Because, they never actually completed the act, as it were. It was just, well, it was just oral stuff. I don't know how to say this. I'm trying to make this a friendly, a family-friendly show, although most kids are in school right now in any case. But the point is that what we learned had nothing to do with actual crimes. You could argue it's a moral crime, but it wasn't an actual, most of the laws about having affairs have been taken off the books and, had been taken off the books long ago, in the 70s and 80s. It was not against the law. What was against the law that Clinton did was he lied about it. But I don't think the average American, in fact, we know the average American didn't think that that was an impeachable offense. About half of all married people, men and women, have had affairs. Americans look at this and go, really? This is your crime? But if the House starts looking into the crimes of Donald Trump, you've got this exhaustive New York Times examination of, Donald Trump, who said he borrowed $1 million from his dad and had to pay it back. No, it turns out that, every year he was getting $1 million from the time he was born. He was a multimillionaire by the time he was 6 or 7. Donald Trump took over $400 million from his dad, and much of it he took from his dad's estate after he died in ways that were illegal. His sister resigned a lifetime federal appointment on the federal bench to avoid being investigated for this. Trump doesn't want to be investigated for this. The New York Times laid it out. And that's just one of his crimes, his many crimes, his money laundering on behalf of oligarchs all around the world, the emoluments violations, the campaign finance crime. This in and of itself would have taken down any other president if any man had gotten elected, or I suppose a woman too, but it's particular. I think this is specific more or less. If any man was convicted or, had paid over $100,000 to cover up having had a year-long affair with a Playboy bunny and a one-night stand with a porn star and then became president, I think most Americans would say, that in and of itself, if you pay to hide that, that's a campaign finance crime. And there's no doubt about this, by the way. That's what Michael Cohen is going to prison for. And the indictment against Michael Cohen says that he did it because he was directed to do it by individual one, a.k.a. Donald Trump. So I don't think the average Fox News viewer knows this. The challenge that we have is that only about 8 million Americans regularly get their news from cable news, whether it's Fox, probably 2 or 3 million Americans, or whether it's CNN or MSNBC, another 5 or 6 million Americans. That's about it. Then you've got, probably another 10 or 15 million Americans who get a good chunk of their news, or at least their political opinions, from right-wing hate radio. So you've got a total of 20 or 30 million Americans, which, can turn out, that's kind of the primary electorate in the Republican Party. And arguably the Democratic Party as well. The people who are actually paying attention. But most Americans aren't paying attention. Most Americans are, maybe getting their news from a half-hour news show in the evening on the big networks, or even the local news, or they're getting it from reading their newspaper, or they're getting it from Facebook or whatever, but they just really don't know what's going on. They're not well informed. An impeachment hearing that is actually looking into these crimes, where people are testifying, and that testimony is going viral, it's going live, it's out there. An impeachment hearing would educate the American public, which is exactly what happened during the Watergate hearings. We went in a 3-month period. In 1974, we went in a 3-month period from 19% of Americans saying that Nixon should be removed from office to 57% of Americans. Why? Because of the show on TV. Trump is saying, hey, I'd welcome it. I'd love it. Yeah, just like he said he really wanted to talk to Mueller. This is the thing that, in my opinion, actually terrifies the Republicans. And the Democrats seem to be terrified about it, too. And I'm telling you, you don't You don't make the mistake that they made with Clinton. Don't try to impeach him for something that isn't obviously a crime to everybody in the country. Don't try to impeach him around a technicality about, well, he lied about having sex with her because he meant real sex, and what, actually happened was sort of half sex. I mean, really? So let's have an actual hearing. We'll be back. It's 18 minutes past the hour. Pick up your thoughts on this, too. What do you think Congress should be doing? Censure? Impeachment? Nothing at all? All of it?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with more of the news of the day, more questions. Should the Trump administration is putting greed over babies, and what's going on with climate change right after this? Welcome back. Boy, what a day, right? Mike in Lomita, California. Hey, Mike, thanks for listening to KPFK. What's up?
My pleasure. I think we should start by impeaching Barr for committing obstruction of justice in public.
I'm with you.
And then proceed with Trump. The few remarkable things about Trump and how he has degraded and defiled the whole political process. He has poisoned the well both literally and figuratively. It's the first presidential candidate I have ever heard who talked openly about refusing to accept the result if he lost the election. He is the first I have ever heard who talked about assassinating his opponent if she won the election. And in terms of poisoning the well in a literal sense, he has done everything he can to attack the Clean Water Act, and now he's saying that he has power above the law because he is not a federal agency, he is the president. That goes even farther than Louis XIV went with his alleged statement that he was the law,
right?
That he was the state,
right? And they took his head off for that,
right? Yeah. Back during Watergate, I worked in a suburban newspaper office, and the front half of this little storefront was ad salesmen, and starting out, all but one of them were pro-Nixon. They were also into BS and, didn't perhaps have the highest ethical standards. But by the time a few months of the Watergate hearings had gone on, they were all very silent, and only the anti-Nixon guy would open his mouth. Mm-hmm. So I think the salutary effect of having hearings on television, which you have cited, would be very helpful.
Yeah.
By the way, do you remember Mr. Obama at the State of the Union talking about how Citizen United would open up our elections to foreign interference? And
Sam Alito said, no way, or something like that, and Sam Alito was wrong.
Right. He was prescient.
Yeah, he absolutely was. Mike, thank you. Excellent points all. George in Freehold, New Jersey. Hey, George, thanks for watching us on Facebook Live. What's up?
Hi, Tom. Thank you for taking my call. Tom, I'd like your opinion on something, and hopefully you can expand on it a little bit. It took the special prosecutor to do the job of the free press in taking on the straw arguments of Sarah Sanders. And I sit and I watch the press conferences, and I watch the president. And I listened to the straw man argument, and I just so everybody understands what a straw man argument is. If I were to say, for example, someone who knows really, really well told me that Tom said that Nancy Pelosi has an IQ of 85, and it never gets challenged. No one ever challenges to say, well, who told you that? Where did you hear that? We challenge it in review after the
George,
fact.
we have 10 seconds. Your point?
My point is, I'd like you to expand on that. Would you like to see more challenges to straw man arguments?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's my whole point about having an impeachment inquiry, is that it would be able to push through those things, to break through them. George, thank you for the call. Thanks for watching us on Facebook Live. We'll be right back. Stick around. See, here's the point, I suppose. We have to figure out a way to cut through the media, to grab the attention of the media. This is what Donald Trump is a master at. He plays reality TV, right? Every day there's a new narrative that he can dump on the media. Every day there's a new outrageous statement. Every day, it's like that. And his crimes are going to recede into the distant memory of Americans over the next 2 years. I mean, it's almost 2 years till the election. I mean, if things aren't challenged, if they're not taken care of, they just go away. And punching through, getting the media to pay attention can be a real challenge. I got an email this morning from an old friend of mine, Earl Katz. He was the entertainment industry coordinator for Earth Day 2000. And by the way, happy Earth Day. That's today in D.C., Earth Day 2000 in Washington, D.C. And Earl, in fact, made Leo DiCaprio chairman of the entertainment committee. I mean, that's how we first met him. And, he sent me a note this morning. He says, I was just watching Dennis Hayes being interviewed on Earth Day on C-SPAN. And here's what he said immediately before being cut off at 10:53 for coverage of the White House Easter egg hunt. Seriously, not making this up. This is what Dennis Hayes said, quote, the things we have to be most concerned about are tipping points, which once reached put things out of our control. For example, in the Arctic, there are methane hydrates. And then at that point, Donald Trump and his wife appeared on C-SPAN accompanied by the Easter Bunny for the White House Easter egg roll. Earl writes, what this means is self-evident. We are victims of inverted and perverted priorities, and yes, there is no Easter Bunny. I mean, wow. Right? I mean, this is like Donald Trump does anything and the media goes right to it. You've got to, this is if it bleeds, it leads, taken to an art form, right? And this is what our media has become. And so basically, if you want to break through that, you've got to have something that is dramatic. And what's dramatic? The testimony of people saying, yes, that man committed a crime, or yes, that man forced me to commit a crime. So I think this is a big deal. I think this is a really and truly big deal. And I mean, there's a million things, right? For example, there was this company that made baby strollers, and kids were being injured. Over 100 injuries from the Britax Child Safety three-wheeled BOB jogging strollers, right, between 2012 and 2018. So the Consumer Product Safety Commission said, pull them, right, withdraw them. They sued, or they fought this until Trump came into office, figuring that the Trump administration would let them off the hook. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. GOP Commissioner Anne Marie Buerkle, basically they said, okay, it's now that they've got a 3-2 Republican majority on the commission said, it's fine. Kids are in danger. Right? I mean, the climate change stuff that Earl was talking about, this, obviously methane hydrates in the Arctic is a big deal. We should be talking about it more. But no, there's an Easter egg roll. Right? Something's going on with Trump. I am strongly of the opinion that any conflation, anybody who argues that there are lessons to learn from the Clinton impeachment that apply to the Trump impeachment needs to be educated. They need to be informed. The lesson that we learned from the Clinton impeachment is don't try to impeach a president who hasn't actually committed impeachable crimes. And having an affair and lying about it is not an impeachable crime. But, colluding with a foreign government to become president, being a criminal, these are impeachable crimes.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I would argue putting greed over babies, selling off public lands are impeachable crimes. Certainly obstruction of justice is an impeachable crime.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Schur's classic history of the Third Reich, the rise and fall of the Third Reich. This is from Chapter 7, page 188, the Nazification of Germany, 1933 to 34. The theory which Hitler had evolved in his vagabond days in Vienna and never forgotten, that the way to power for a revolutionary movement was to ally itself with some of the powerful institutions in the state, had now worked out in practice pretty much as he had calculated. The president, backed by the army and the conservatives, had made him chancellor. His political power, though great, was, however, not complete. It was shared with these three sources of authority which had put him into office and which were outside and to some extent distrustful of the National Socialist movement. Hitler's immediate task, therefore, was to quickly eliminate them from the driver's seat, make his party the exclusive master of the state, and then with the power of an authoritarian government and its police, carry out the Nazi revolution. He had been in office scarcely 24 hours when he made his first decisive move, springing a trap on his gullible conservative captors and setting in motion a chain of events which he either originated or controlled, and which at the end of just 6 months would bring the complete Nazification of Germany and his own elevation to dictator of the Reich, unified and defederalized for the first time in German history. 5 hours after being sworn in at 5 p.m. on January 3rd, 1933, Hitler held his first cabinet meeting. The minutes of the session, which turned up at Nuremberg among the hundreds of tons of captured secret documents, reveal how quickly and adroitly Hitler, aided by the crafty Goering, began to take his conservative colleagues for a ride. Hindenburg had named Hitler to head not a presidential cabinet, but one based on a majority of the Reichstag, the parliament. However, the Nazis and the Nationalists, the only two parties represented in the government, had only 247 seats out of 538 in parliament and thus lacked a majority. To attain it, they needed the backing of the Center Party with its 70 seats. In the very first hours of the new government, Hitler had dispatched Goering to talk with the centrist leaders, and now he reported to the cabinet that the center was demanding certain concessions. Goering had therefore proposed that the Reichstag be dissolved and new elections held, and Hitler agreed. Hugenberg, a man of wooden mind for all his success in business, objected to taking the center into the government, but on the other hand opposed new elections, well knowing that the Nazis, with the resources of the state behind them, might win an absolute majority at the polls and thus be in a position to dispense with his own services and those of his conservative friends. So he proposed simply suppressing the Communist Party. With its 100 seats eliminated, the Nazis and the Nationalists would have a majority. But Hitler would not go so far at that moment, and it was finally agreed that the Chancellor himself would confer with the Center Party leaders on the following morning, and that if the talks were fruitless, the cabinet would then ask for new elections. Hitler easily made the talks fruitless. At his request, the center leader, Monsignor Kaas, submitted as a basis for discussion a list of questions which added up to a demand that Hitler promised to govern constitutionally. But Hitler, tricking both Kaas and his cabinet members, reported to the latter that the center had made impossible demands and that there was no chance of agreement. He therefore proposed that the president be asked to dissolve the Reichstag and call new elections. Hugenberg and Papen were trapped. After a solemn assurance that from the Nazi leader that the cabinet would remain unchanged, however, the elections turned out, they agreed to go along with him. New elections were set for March 5th. For the first time in the last relatively free election Germany was to have, the Nazi Party would now employ all the vast resources of the government to win votes. Goebbels was jubilant. Now it will be easy, he wrote in his diary on February 3rd, to carry on the fight, for we can call on all the resources of the state. Radio and press are at our disposal. We shall stage a masterpiece of propaganda, and this time, naturally, there is no lack of money. The big businessmen, pleased with the new government that was going to put the organized workers in their place and leave management to run its business as it wished, were asked to cough up. This they agreed to do at a meeting on February 20th at Goering's Reichstag President's Palace, at which Dr. Schott acted as host, and Goering and Hitler laid down the line to a couple of dozen of Germany's leading magnates, including Krupp, von Bohlen, who had become an enthusiastic Nazi overnight, Bosch and Schnitzler of IG Farben, and Vogler, head of the United Steelworks. The record of this secret meeting has been preserved. Hitler began a long speech with a sop to the industrialists. Private enterprise, he said, cannot be maintained in an age of democracy. It is conceivable only if the people have a sound idea of authority and personality. All the worldly goods we possess we owe to the struggle of the chosen. We must not forget that all the benefits of culture must be introduced more or less with an iron fist. He promised the businessmen that he would eliminate the Marxist and restore the Wehrmacht, the German army, which was of special interest to such industries as Krupp, United Steel, and IG Farben, which stood to gain the most from the rearmament. Now we stand before the last election, Hitler concluded, and he promised his listeners that regardless of the outcome, there will be no retreat. If he did not win, he would stay in power, quote, by other means with other weapons, end quote. Goering, talking more to the immediate point, stressed the necessity of financial sacrifices, which surely would be much easier for industry to bear if it realized that the election of March the 5th will surely be the last one for the next 10 years, probably even for the next 100 years. All this was made clear to the assembled industrialists, and they responded with enthusiasm to the promise of the end of the infernal elections, the end of democracy, the end of disarmament. The book, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich by William Shearer.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. Diana DeVoe tweets to me, in order to avoid blushing and stammering when speaking of Clinton-Lewinsky affair, use the term foreplay. Good idea. Thank you for that. Interesting, the Jesse James tweets, wasn't Nixon's impeachment that turned the public against Nixon, but it was the Senate public hearings in the Watergate break-in. And, others are censure as a coward's. This is from Sean. Censure is a coward's way out, and Sean on Twitter. And ineffective in ensuring the rule of law exists, the House must impeach, and Republicans in the Senate must then hold the president accountable. DJ Chi-Town, this is a hoot. He says, we need to create GOP accounts on Twitter and Facebook and create surveys like the Russian bots do. Quote, when Trump is impeached, who would you like to be our Republican nominee? Pence, Romney, Graham, Palin? Yeah, interesting stuff. Anyhow, Sue in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Sue, what's up?
Hi, good morning, Tom. Great to talk to you.
Thank you, Sue. Good morning.
Thank you. I just had a flash of a thought this morning. I voted in the 2000 election and in South Florida, in Palm Beach County, and I'm still really angry that Al Gore did not, get his presidency. So could we have the Democrats, elect a placeholder and give the presidency to Al Gore and then put Hillary Clinton as his vice president? Wild thought, but what do you think?
Well, first of all, I'm sure that Al Gore and Hillary Clinton would not have anything to do with that. They're both way beyond wanting to be, elected officials. But
right.
Your point about the theft of the 2000 election is one that the Democrats need to be hammering. I can guarantee that if a Democrat had won the 1968 election by committing treason, as Richard Nixon did with South Vietnam, it would be repeated every single day on every single Fox News report and on right-wing hate radio. If a Democrat had won the election in 1980 by cutting a deal on the side with the Ayatollah, we'll sell you spare parts for your American weaponry if you'll hold the hostages for another 100 days so that we can make Jimmy Carter look like a fool. If that had happened on the other side, again, the Republicans would be all over it. And again, in 2000, when the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post and USA Today, when this media consortium, the Associated Press, finally, they brought literally trailer trucks of all the ballots in Florida, the entire state, up to New York, where they hired a whole team of people, and it took them a year to count them. And in November of 2001, literally 1 year after the election, a year and 2 weeks after the election, they published the report saying that by any measure, by any standard, overvote, undervote, intent of the voter, without the intent of the voter, hanging chads, pregnant chads, dimpled chads, by any standard, Al Gore won more votes than George Bush did, and therefore the Supreme Court, by stopping the recount in Florida, which was ordered by the Florida Supreme Court and is required by the Florida Constitution, that the U.S. Supreme Court, by stopping that count, gave the election to George W. Bush. And George Bush had sued based on that. He said, I will be irreparably harmed if this count is allowed to continue. And, Americans don't know this stuff because the media doesn't constantly repeat it. So, Sue, thank you for giving me an opportunity to do so. I appreciate the call. Thank you. And thanks for listening to us there in Albuquerque. Ron in Screven, Georgia. Am I saying that right, Ron?
Yes, you got it, Tom.
Hey, what's up?
I just have one quick question. Is it a fact that if you lie to Congress, it's a federal crime?
That's correct.
And if so, why was it that Sessions lied to Congress several times and he was never charged with anything?
Because Congress tends not to want to go after their own, and because Congress, by and large, has been controlled by Republicans up until the last, year and a half, and that's only the House of Representatives, by the way, that the Democrats control right now, and I believe that that Sessions lied before the Senate, so the Senate would have to go after him. The Senate's been in Republican control ever since his lies.
Yeah, I figured it was mostly that, but I was just curious if there was some other body that could come in and say, hey, look, because right now one of Trump's crime family members is in jail or going to jail for lying to Congress, correct?
Yeah, several of them, actually. And, Michael Cohen being the most conspicuous, I believe lying to Congress was one of the charges. Maybe you're wrong on that, Ron, but in any case, it's entirely possible that the other agency, you asked if another agency could prosecute Jeff Sessions for lying to Congress. And yes, the answer is yes. A federal prosecutor could bring those charges, but the agency that would have to do it would be the Department of Justice, which is the boss of all the federal prosecutors. And the guy who runs the Department of Justice right now is Bill Barr, who is a professional cover-up artist for Republican political criminals. So, it ain't going to happen. But a good point's all, and these are the... Go ahead, Ron.
I've just been following Bill Barr since he was brought in to be Trump's AG. And, I understand what you're saying. That's not going to happen.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Ron, thanks for the call. Brian in Schaumburg, Illinois. Hey, Brian, what's up?
Good morning. I wanted to discuss the bigger picture, and I think William Barr, as well as all the minions, I think their real mission is to save the Republican Party.
I agree.
Because if Trump is exposed for what he really is, I mean, if we can get 10% of his base to really open their eyes and see who he really is and go against him, the entire Republican Party will be destroyed, figuratively.
Yeah.
They will lose immense amounts of power. They'll lose the White House. Definitely will still not get the House. And then Senate.
Well, this is what happened after Nixon resigned. The Republicans didn't control anything for a long, long time.
Right. And, they're at the zenith. I mean, their decades-long project to gain control of the government came to fruition, and then Donald Trump came along and stole it from them.
Right.
And now Donald Trump is a wild man who's at the steering wheel of the Republican Party, and they have no choice but to back him no matter what he does, because if they don't, the base will leave him, enough of the base. I mean, there's 20% of crazy people that will never, ever leave him.
Right.
But if they lose another 10% of their voters, they are screwed in the long run, and they will lose on all fronts, and that's what they are deathly afraid of. And I think what we really need to focus on is the propaganda campaign that's being waged, not just on Fox News. Any right-wing media outlet is just propaganda. And if we get into just daily fights about every little detail that happens every single day, people's eyes glaze over and they lose sight of the big picture. I'm no propaganda expert, but we need to, somehow open people's eyes to who Donald Trump really is and what's really going on in this country. And, I mean, just a simple one I've thought of is just, like Tom Steyer, he can make commercials just showing Trump lying. He can say, here's 10 seconds of him saying one thing, here's 10 seconds saying completely opposite, and it could just go on and on and on and on and on.
Yeah.
He makes absolutely no
The problem
sense.
you have, Brian, is that for the people who, for example, are opposed to abortion, as long as Trump keeps putting anti-abortion right-wing judges on the courts, they'll put up with anything. Because they think that this is like a Holocaust. This is a life and death issue.
I've seen the videos of people saying that Donald Trump is Cyrus, out of the Bible. He's not a Christian, but God put him here to help Jesus because Jesus wants him. I mean, just all this constant ridiculous framing of the issue.
But my point is that there's a
mind-blowing.
chunk of his base that really doesn't care what his behavior is, as long as he, the billionaires don't care what his behavior is as long as he pushes through tax cuts. And the Republicans are actually talking about another tax cut next year. And the evangelicals and the hard right, members of the anti-abortion group, and some on the left who are opposed to abortion, don't care what he does as long as he keeps putting these judges in place. But there are, and Brian, thank you for the call. But there are also larger issues. There's, Elizabeth Warren this morning just rolled out a plan to eliminate student loan debt. Eliminate it, right? up to $50,000 in student loan debt would be just free to everybody in America who earns less than $100,000. And people who earn over $100,000, there's a sliding scale. So if you earn over $200,000 a year, you get a $40,000 reduction in your student loan debt, and and it goes down and up from there. And I mean, this is and then after that, all of the 2- and 4-year public colleges are free, and they're paid for by state and federal governments, and that's absolutely brilliant. Right. And so we need to be talking about what we will do, what the Democrats will do, at the same time that we're talking about what Trump, what a criminal Trump is, essentially. Jeff in Englewood, Colorado. Hey, Jeff, what's up?
Good morning, Tom. I think there's kind of a little naivete about one of your thoughts about, you mentioned earlier about Donald Trump being the one person who could get away with this. I disagree. I think that you have shown in many years and many times that the Republicans, as long as there is somebody that is a Republican that wields their policies, they will stand behind them no matter what.
Well, that was the point that I was making earlier, that you've got interest groups who are very, very happy with what Donald Trump is doing. Corporate America loves the fact that they can increase the level of pollution while increasing their profits, and drill on public lands and all this kind of stuff. So you've got, the CEOs love Donald Trump. You've got the evangelicals who love Donald Trump. You've got the hardcore, listeners of Fox News, the poor suckers, essentially, the Fox News and right-wing hate radio listeners who love Donald Trump. None of those things, in my opinion, are going to change very much.
Yeah, I would put forth to you, though, if it was Donald Trump or a chimpanzee with a typewriter, they would still support that the crime.
As long as they know that, right? As long as they know that their agenda is being accomplished. Yeah, absolutely, Jeff. I agree with you. And in a way, that was the point that I was making earlier. So the question then becomes, if that's like the billionaires and the CEOs, that's less than 1% of the population. The hard right evangelicals, maybe 20% of the population. But then everybody else who made Trump president, those are vulnerable votes. Those are people who could be awakened.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
In my humble opinion, and it's going to take some, some circus to do it, some hearings, some public hearings. Let's start. And welcome back, Rhoda in Portland, Michigan. Hey, Rhoda, what's up? Thanks for watching Free Speech.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Tom. I just want to thank you again for doing what you do.
Thank you, Rhoda.
So necessary. Now, as an old retired English teacher, I feel that we're living in a Shakespearean tragedy. Act 3, the Miller Report, is over. We're in Act 4. Fall in action now. And we need the conclusion. Act 5, which is no impeachment. But pursuit of criminal charges after the president is out of office. The Democratic Party must stay focused on the issues, especially health care. And as you just said, some sort of free community college education plan also. It's manageable.
Yeah. So, no, it's absolutely doable.
And we must remember also that everything that people are saying, we already knew what was there, and we already knew the outcome. Comey told the president from day one, Mr. President, we're not investigating you. From day one, the focus was on what Russia did.
Mm-hmm.
So why are people acting so surprised? Mueller's a Republican. His friend is Barr, Republican. We know what Barr was like. I mean, if it walks like a duck and talks and waggles, it's a duck.
Yeah.
We had a duck in Comey, a duck in Mueller, and a duck in Barr. So why the surprise?
Yeah, well, and it was, the commission to Mueller was very, very narrowly circumscribed, and one that, I think that the Republicans in the Justice Department, Jeff Sessions, Rod Rosenstein, James Comey at the time, thought would be. Well, actually, this came about as a result of Comey being fired, but they thought that this would be tolerable to Republicans because it was an investigation into a, quote, hostile foreign power, or at least not an ally, not an explicit ally, interfering in our elections. Frankly, I think that there should be remember when I believe it was Mitch McConnell, it might have been Paul Ryan, invited...
The most dangerous man in the country.
Yeah, invited Netanyahu to come to Congress and speak while Obama was president, and they didn't tell Obama about it. And he came over here and basically gave a sales pitch for the Republican Party. I mean, that's interference in our elections, in my opinion. There's, our elections have been interfered with by a bunch of foreign countries, and it needs to be explicitly outlawed beyond just, these kind of milquetoast laws that we have or regulations that we have around things of value in political campaigns.
Yeah, and that's what the new Congress needs to do. They need to try to make a set of laws that covers every single thing that wasn't quite covered with clarity this last time. But
and Mueller refers to this. In his report, he talks about, it is within the capacity, I'm paraphrasing from memory, but basically it's within the capacity of Congress to criminalize some of these actions that are kind of on the edge of being criminal.
Yeah, they're on the periphery of criminality, and what Congress needs to do right now is to put it in writing, share it with the people. I mean, the Democratic Party can also take out ads in the Wall Street Journal or whatever it is, spread the news. These are so-and-so and so things we will no longer tolerate. They have to do something. They can't just go talking, we're going to get him. No impeachment. Yeah. This is stuff. Because the kind of person he is. He probably was looking at pretty faces and not even paying attention to half the stuff they were doing, quite frankly. And
and that's the problem. People are working, people are going to school, people are freaked out. 40 years of Reaganomics has just, gutted the middle class. And the consequence of that is that people don't have the time to actually pay attention. Rhoda, thank you for the call. Thanks for watching Free Speech in Portland, Michigan. We'll be back. It's 50 minutes, 10 minutes before the top of the hour. We'll be right back. Welcome back. 10 minutes before the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you. Andy in Belmont, Michigan, listening to WPRR. Hey, Andy, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Good afternoon. Hey, if we don't get the store-bought and corporate media on our side, we're never going to get our issues out. They just keep it's all going right to his, to Trump.
And the way to get them on your side is to offer them circus.
Yeah. And we're not that we're above that. I mean, we're adults here, Well,
it doesn't need to be gratuitous circus, but there has to be, Donald Trump knows this, and that's why he's sitting in the White House right now. If you offer the media something that is performance, if you offer the media something that's dynamic, that's active, that is pushing the boundaries, if you give that to the media, they will run with it.
Do you think that if we can get the Mueller report out there and we start having Congress looking into it, do you think that they're going to just sit there and call Mr. Mueller a liar to his face?
No, I don't. But it almost doesn't matter because it's not going to be, obviously we want Mueller to testify, but it's not going to be Mueller's testimony that matters. It's going to be the testimony of the people who are actually participating with Donald Trump in the crimes that were committed. And that's what needs to happen. And that's what needs to get out there. And, it's, go ahead.
And they don't, how many of those guys are sitting in prison or have been prosecuted already? And when it comes to it, corporate media doesn't say anything about those guys. Manafort, Gates, not a thing.
Well, again, they were being discussed when there was a trial going on, and this is another argument for there needs to be, for example, Andy, thank you for the call. For example, this morning when my friend Earl Katz was watching C-SPAN, and this really important interview about global warming, and they cut away to the White House for the Easter egg roll. Well, why did they cut away to the White House for the Easter egg roll? They wouldn't have done that if it was Obama, because we know it would have been absolutely routine. But Trump was up there with a microphone, and it was like, oh, here he goes. He's going to say something crazy. We got to cover this. So it's like, the media knows if Trump is coming up, they drop everything and put him on the air because it's going to be crazy. It's going to be a circus. It's going to be theater. The Democrats need to be providing theater in Congress, not gratuitous theater, serious theater, just like they did in the Watergate hearings. Bob in Grapeland, Texas. Hey, Bob, what's up? Thanks for watching us on YouTube.
Hey, Tom. Thanks for having me on. I was just wondering what your thoughts were with Volume 1, Volume 2 of the Mueller report, that Volume 1 was just brushed off when there were what seemed to me to be obvious collusion going on. If Manafort shows up at a meeting and passes off polling data in battleground states, and then the Russians go off and put ads in those states and all of that. So how is that just nothing to worry about, nothing to see here, let's move on? What's your thoughts on that?
I think that, that's collusion to me, and collusion, of course, is not a legal term. That's also conspiracy to me. And
well, that's what I mean. I was just using the word. Obviously, yes, collusion. I mean,
I get
conspiracy, but that's the way they describe it. But I'm just saying, in general, that's them working together, him passing off the information as the director or as the chairman of the campaign.
As the campaign manager. Yeah, absolutely. No, but there are so many levels of criminality here that, frankly, need to be exposed. And Robert Mueller took the most conservative, and I mean that not in the political sense, but in the in the traditional sense, he took the most conservative perspective possible. It was, we're not going to point a finger unless there's something really clearly worth pointing a finger at. We're not going to call a crime unless it's obviously a crime. With regard to obstruction of justice, he said, we can't say that he didn't commit this crime, which is his way of saying, yeah, he committed obstruction of justice, but I can't say so because the DOJ regulations prevent me from doing that.
Which is ridiculous.
I agree. With regard to collusion, he comes right out and says, we didn't look into collusion because it's not actually a legal crime. There's no law against collusion, which is the reason why Trump has been using that word for 2 years now. And Bob, you're absolutely right. So this is the kind of stuff that would come out. Bob, thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. Morris, listening on KPFK in Long Beach, California. Hey, Morris, what's up?
Professor, can the House Ways and Means Committee chairman, can he have Steve Mnuchin arrested?
Only if Steve Mnuchin is in the building, basically. The Capitol Police have the power to arrest people, and Congress, I believe, could order that. But the executive branch, the president is, the executive branch is where all the real police powers are held.
We already know where I'm going with this. Hold on, I need you to talk to somebody. Hello, my name is Al Capone, and I'm talking to you from the grave. Mm-hmm. And I understand that you folks are dealing with organized crime from the White House on down. Well, let me give you a suggestion. The only way out for you folks is income tax evasion and tax fraud. Right. They're not arbitrary. They're not subjective. They're not ambiguous. I'm talking about numbers.
And every American understands them because every American pays taxes.
Amen. Tomorrow he is supposed to disclose 6 years of taxes. Now, Thom Hartmann, if that man does not give up Donald Trump's taxes for the next 6 years, that's the only narrative in this country.
Yeah.
I'll talk to you later.
Yeah. Thank you, Morris. Well said. Gary in Macomb, Michigan. Hey, Gary, what's up?
Hi, Tom. How are you doing?
Good.
Great show as usual. Tom, here's what's going on. I think the deal is if they do not impeach him, I will not vote. And here's why, because Trump will win. Trump will win because he'll control the narrative. He'll go around saying, look, they couldn't even impeach me. He'll control it. And the thing, Tom, is that he controls the media. He has Fox News. He has 9 out of 10, if I'm not mistaken, political talk shows are conservative. They will land-based us. He has a propaganda machine equal to Nazi Germany. And if we don't have the courage to impeach him, the Democratic Party's no good anyway, and we're done. Yeah. So I'm not even going to vote if they don't take it to there.
Well, it's not just you voting or not voting. It is every government around the world will say, and every corporation. We've got an agenda. There's something we want done, and we want it done by the president. So we'll help elect the next president. We'll interfere with the next election. Whether it's hacking into voting machines or whether it's running ads on Facebook or whether it's, God only knows what. We'll figure out a way, right? And that's probably the most dangerous part of not impeaching. And thank you for the call, Gary, is that basically you're saying, okay, this behavior is acceptable. We'll continue the conversation after the break at the top of the hour. Stick around. Oh, and
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
This is our book today is Playing with Fire, the 1968 Election and the Transformation of American Politics by Lawrence O'Donnell. The first chapter, Seizing the Moment. It starts in 1968. Richard Nixon was in a makeup chair when he met Roger Ailes. Maybe it was the makeup chair that set Ailes off. He was looking at the man who might have been president right now if he had just sat in the makeup chair CBS offered him in Chicago before the first televised presidential debate in American history. Nixon had ignored the network's makeup artist and used a drugstore product called Lazy Shave to cover his heavy 5 o'clock shadow. Nixon once said, "I can shave within 30 seconds before I go on television and still have a beard." The day after the debate, the Chicago Daily News ran the headline, "Was Nixon sabotaged by TV makeup artists?" Richard Daley, the all-powerful Democratic mayor of Chicago, said, "My God, they've embalmed him even before he died." Nixon lost the election to John F. Kennedy by 0.2% of the vote, 49.7% to 49.5%. In an election that close, every mistake matters. A mistake like not getting the makeup right was the kind of thing that infuriated Roger Ailes. Now, 7 years later, Ailes was meeting Nixon for the first time in the makeup room of the Mike Douglas show. At age 26, Ailes looked like an assistant, but he was the boss, the executive producer of the show. And Nixon was once again a presidential candidate in what was beginning to look like a crowded field covering the 1968 Republican nomination. Ailes wanted Nixon to be president, and he knew the most powerful force blocking Nixon's path to the White House was television. To win the White House in the 1960s, you had to understand and respect the power of television. Ailes also knew that one of Nixon's potential rivals for the Republican nomination understood everything about television, Ronald Reagan, the former film and TV actor. Ailes wondered what Nixon had learned about TV since the makeup disaster of the 1960 campaign. Sitting in the makeup chair, Nixon offhandedly mentioned to Ailes how silly it felt to try to reach voters by appearing on an afternoon talk show like this one instead of a news show like Meet the Press. The Mike Douglas show is targeted at housewives and usually populated by B-list showbiz celebrities. In response, Ailes instantly rattled off a list of every bad move Nixon had ever made on TV, and it was a long list. Ailes was a teenager when he'd seen some of these things. This was not the way people talked to former Vice President Richard Milhous Nixon. There was none of the deference Nixon had become accustomed to over the decades, and Nixon loved it. Nixon made Ailes an offer he couldn't refuse. Instead of trying to make Mike Douglas America's biggest afternoon TV star, make Richard Nixon America's next president. With Ailes on the media team, the Nixon campaign was ready to make the move from being the worst TV campaign to the best. "We're going to build this whole campaign around television," Nixon told his media team. "You boys just tell me what to do and I'll do it." Roger Ailes' career in Republican politics, which included every day he ran Fox News, turned out to be longer than Richard Nixon's. Ailes became more influential in Republican politics than Nixon ever was. We have reason to wonder who would be president today if Richard Nixon had not provoked Roger Ailes in the Mike Douglas show makeup room. Such are the seeds that were planted in American politics in the 1968 presidential campaign. "Run, Bobby, Run" is the subhead for the next part of this. Bobby was a natural on television. In 1967, he was the only potential presidential candidate who could charm a TV audience just by being himself. All he needed was his smile. Bobby was the Elvis of American politics, the only politician who didn't need a last name to identify him. But his last name was everything. It was Bobby Kennedy's last name that made every potential candidate fear him. As the field of candidates began to take shape in 1967, every campaign calculation depended on Bobby, even when he showed no signs of wanting to run, even when he told people he wasn't going to run. President Lyndon Baines Johnson feared Bobby to the point of obsession. Johnson thought Bobby was the only one who could do the unthinkable, challenge the incumbent president's grip on the Democratic nomination. Johnson was sure that Bobby was the only Democrat who might dare run against him. He was wrong. Nixon feared Bobby too, as did every Republican planning a campaign. Nixon knew exactly what to fear. He had lost to a Kennedy before. Losing to a Kennedy meant losing to the Kennedy political machine, and it meant losing it to the Kennedy style. A political machine can be beaten by a better political machine, though Nixon had never seen a better political machine than the Kennedys. Kennedy's style was something else. Nixon knew there was nothing Ailes could do for his image that could compete with Kennedy's style. Nixon couldn't change his sharply receding hairline. At 54, he was too old to do anything but tamp down his short, dark hair as flat as possible on his head. Bobby's hair had grown longer every year of the 1960s. Now at 42, he had the shaggiest hair in the United States Senate. His little brother Ted was the only other senator with a full head of hair. Bobby's hair was beginning to grow over his ears, rock musician length for the Senate then. And everywhere Bobby spoke outside the Senate chamber, he was treated like a rock star. That's what Nixon and Johnson feared most about Bobby, the way the crowds responded to him. They'd never seen anything like it in politics. Nixon and Johnson were both old enough to remember the first time anyone saw fans screaming and swooning for Frank Sinatra in the 1940s, before, during, and after every song Sinatra sang. America saw an even more intense version of that fan reaction when the Beatles landed in the United States in 1964. And now Nixon and Johnson saw a version of it happening to Bobby. Everywhere Bobby went, crowds worked themselves into frenzies. When he spoke, he didn't sound like any senator they'd heard before. His voice wasn't stiff and self-conscious. The book Playing with Fire by Lawrence O'Donnell.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, you know, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, you know, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com and you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. We've been discussing, you know, how should impeachment happen? How should it happen? If so, should censure be the alternative? You know, all the various ways that Democrats basically can deal with a criminal president, you know, with the actual criminal in the White House. We, you know, something on the order of what we saw back in 1974 with Richard Nixon, and arguably worse. And a lot of Trump's behavior seems to be driven out of some sort of deep underlying psychopathology. And to that, one of the world's leading experts, and in my opinion, the world's leading expert on this topic, is Dr. Justin Frank, MD. He is a psychoanalyst and clinical professor at the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Science at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. He's the author of Trump on the Couch. Previously, he wrote Obama on the Couch and Bush on the Couch. Bush on the Couch was particularly eye-opening for me. That was a remarkable book. Obama on the Couch was fascinating. His Twitter handle is Justin Frank MD, and it's, you know, and his books, of course, are available any place you can get books. Dr. Frank, welcome back to the program.
Hi, thank you very much, Tom. Sorry about the visuals here.
No, it's all good. It's all good. We've got a nice picture of you up. So you talk about how when Donald Trump was 13 years old, his father found a cache of switchblades, and Donald was engaging in some very, very problematic behavior. How does this incident from his life inform us about the kind of president he has been so far and the kind of president he might be if he really gets pushed? You know, for example, Russia really threatens us, or North Korea or China, or, you know, somebody who actually has the power to follow through.
Well, I think that the main push that he's been afraid of is Mueller more than Russia or China. We probably are more afraid of Russia and China, of course. But actually, it's really striking. His father told him that he was never allowed to go to Manhattan when he was about 10. And he would sneak in there a lot with a friend of his. And they saw West Side Story on Broadway and got fascinated by switchblades. And they started buying them and hiding them. He had a 9-inch knife. He had a couple of really huge knives, and his father finally discovered them and sent him off to military school immediately. He felt that he could not cope with Donald. Donald has a delinquent mind. He hates regulations. He hates being told what to do, and he's gone out of his way to live a secret life where he can do whatever he wants, devoid of rules. The only person who really understood him was his own father, who was also basically a criminal and a racist, but he did understand his son, Donnie.
Yeah. Now, his grandfather made his money in the original Trump fortune running whorehouses on the West Coast, if that word is something that you can use on the air. I think I'm not sure what else you would call them.
He did run whorehouses, and he bought a lot of land, but he ran whorehouses, made a lot of money up in the Yukon, actually, in the West, and up in Washington State. And then his son, who was born in 1905, by the time the son was about 12, that's Don's father, his father had died, and he sort of took over everything at a very young age with the mother's help. And he built a fortune and made a tremendous amount of money after World War II, where there were lots of GI Bills and amazing government support for returning veterans. And he just built that, took all kinds of money out of the government.
Right, this is Fred Trump. Right.
This is Fred Trump, his father, and took all kinds of money out of the government, built all these buildings, wouldn't rent to African Americans, was very viciously anti-Semitic, and actually lied about where he was born. He was born in Germany, and he had changed his name from a German name so he could rent to Jews at least, because there were a lot of Jews in Queens. The point about Donald, that he's really like the son of a mob family, and unconsciously he wants to break things. He wants to do things secretly and avoid any kind of rules. And the only person he felt really got him was, he felt in his fantasy life, was his father and then Mueller, who instead of throwing him out of the house in Queens, was going to throw him out of the White House. And I think he was terrified. He is so relieved that Mueller did not say, indict, throw out. Right. And because of that, I think he feels that he's gotten a blank check to continue to do whatever he's doing. He is not a person who's interested really in anything. This morning, in fact, some people were talking on the morning show about how come he doesn't even do anything to help himself in the polls, like do a few of the promises, like fixing infrastructure or doing certain things. He actually doesn't because he doesn't care about those things. He's not interested in polls particularly. He's interested in, obviously, in money, in getting away with things, and in breaking things. And he has been devoted to doing that ever since he was a kid. I don't know what else to say.
Well, you at one point you said he belongs in a structured mental health facility, not the Oval Office. Is that not hyperbole?
No.
Seriously.
As president, the only way to get through to him would be in a structured mental health setting. There are other people who are CEOs and also common criminals who have a similar psychology to Donald Trump, and they often get away with things, and then they're caught by the law. Donald has a brilliant group of lawyers. He's always escaped the law, but his goal is to demolish things. He pretends to be a builder. He wants to prove that he's a builder, but actually he's a breaker. And as we have discovered, even in the last 2 years, that it's easier to break things, including institutions, than it is to build them, which has taken years.
Do you think he's trying to break the United States?
Yes. I think he's trying to break the United States. One thing I think he's really trying to do unconsciously is to get the word united out of the United States. He is constantly trying to set one group against another. He's trying to, it's called, we talk about it as being divisive and division. One of the congresswomen, the new ones, I forgot her name, Tlaib, said that the word she would use is disconnect. He disconnects things. He disconnects thoughts and feelings. He disconnects. She doesn't talk like a psychoanalyst, but she's talking about disconnecting us from ourselves, from each other. He disconnects people. He breaks the normal connections. So it's very hard to follow him. He floods us with tweets. He makes it very difficult for people to think and respond, and he is relentlessly brilliant at that. But he's disconnecting thought. He's attacking our capacity to think.
Wow.
And I think that's a very hard thing.
So
because we have to sit back and think, but when everybody's busy checking his lies and checking out whether he's telling the truth and all the different things he's doing, we're like chasing after a comet.
Yeah. Doonesbury this weekend was, Donald Trump is about to tell his 10,000th lie. What will it be? It was, and it's true. I mean, it's so strange. But the fact of the matter is that nobody's going to put him in a structured mental health facility, and he is in the White House. So, what, in your opinion, is the way that the Democrats should deal with, this essentially dangerous man in the White House?
Yes. They have to begin impeachment hearings immediately. It does, even if the impeachment hearings fail, which they might, he might not be convicted. They have to be started immediately.
Because
those have to include, because it has to be brought to the public even more so how dangerous he is. He has to be stopped, and there's no way I can think of to stop him. You said something before I came on about. I don't remember what word you used, but censuring.
Yeah, censuring.
Censuring doesn't really stop a person either. I guess you can. I don't know how you could censure a president. And clearly, they just announced in England. The Observer just wrote that they don't want him to come and see the Queen. They just feel that it's a criminal. They don't want a criminal president.
Right. Yeah. Well, an act of censure would be basically Congress saying to the American people, we repudiate these behaviors, and it would be a way of identifying those specific behaviors. The advantage of a censure resolution is that it can be passed by either house. It doesn't require both, and it only requires a majority vote because there's no consequence to it, technically. But the big consequence is the publicity associated with it.
Yes, and the enumeration of why they're censuring him.
Exactly. Yeah. So I mean, whether they end up impeaching or whether they just look at the political landscape and say, okay, there's still not 50% plus support for impeachment, which is the threshold that Nixon passed in the week before he resigned.
Right.
If they can't hit that 50% public opinion, then at that point they just abandon impeachment and go for a censure. But at least they got it on the books. Does that make sense?
Yes. I think censuring makes so much sense. I never thought about that as a possibility because I don't know enough about the political side. As a medical person, I wanted him quarantined.
Yeah.
He really needs to be isolated from any capacity to make major decisions. And I don't know how you do that. But censuring would be a step in that direction. And then I do think they need to start impeachment proceedings. One of the things that the father of psychoanalysis said, Freud. Oh, you're going off here?
Yeah, but you got 10 seconds here.
Okay. Thought is trial action, and it's time to act.
Amen. Okay.
It's about thought, but it's time to act.
There you go. Dr. Justin Frank, the author of Trump on the Couch, clinical professor at the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Science at George Washington University. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And if you want to tweet at Dr. Frank, his Twitter handle is JustinFrankMD. We'll be back. And welcome back. Brad in Topeka, Kansas. Hey, Brad, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind?
Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks for your show and everything you do. I just wanted to say that roughly 40 of the 50 states that had their polling databases hacked by Russia, we as a country didn't even know that until after it happened. So any tangible evidence of conspiracy is solely in the hands of Russian hackers or the Kremlin and has been destroyed by Trump. Has been destroyed. But Trump and Putin, they meet in secret. So many one of my biggest issues with what's going on right now in our country is in regard to those that are on the fence about this conspiracy with Trump, since there's no tangible evidence. Any informed person knows in their gut full well that something transpired, even without evidence. And Adam Schiff has been saying collusion's in plain sight and inviting Russia to find those Clinton emails. 5 hours later, per the Mueller report, Russia started working on it. And to me, that's absolutely collusion, stating no conspiracy, no collusion, etc. Many of us have fought against what Trump stands for since he's been in office. And when that summary came out by Bill Barr, people started to waver. And that's what he wants. He lies, he delays, he buys his way out of everything. And that plays into his hand. We can't give up on that no matter what. The propaganda makes things appear a certain way, not how they really are. And even if he doesn't get impeached, we must continue to vote. His propaganda is not just fear-mongering, it's to discourage those that oppose him. But we must push on at all costs, is how I feel.
Yeah, I cannot disagree with you on that. I think that your point is well taken. Thank you for that. Joe in Chino, California. Hey, Joe, what's up?
Hi, I've been for a very long time now thinking that impeachment was a waste of time. But I've had an epiphany recently, and it has to do with history. When Clinton was impeached, everybody said, oh, the only other guy in history was Andrew Johnson.
Right.
So let's impeach him just to have him go down in history as being a president that was impeached. If we don't do it for any other reason, get it in the history books, and let's have people look at it forever that Donald Trump is impeached and why.
Yeah. Yeah, in other words, just the stain of the impeachment is enough. Like there's this asterisk after both the Bill Clinton and the Andrew Johnson presidencies that were both impeached by the House of Representatives, indicted,
Precisely.
Essentially. Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. Thank you for that, Joe. Rachel in Vashon, Washington. Hey, Rachel, what's up? Rachel? Rachel? I am not hearing Rachel. Okay. Let's see. Actually, we just have 32 seconds. I'm just going to riff here for a second, and then we'll pick up more of your calls right after the break. I mentioned this thing about the Trump administration putting greed over babies this morning. I mean, this is emblematic. They're putting literally the survival of the planet. They're putting greed over that. They're putting greed over, they're allowing the fossil fuel billionaires to increase their level of pollution so that more people, the estimate is 10,000 additional cancers will happen, in the next couple of years as a consequence of dialing back on the clean air laws or rules that the Obama administration put into place. I mean, this is a level of disregard for the American people that is absolutely shocking. It's 21 minutes, coming up on 22 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. We put together the coolest little newsletter every single day or every single weekday, every day that we do our show. And Sue Nethercutt is the editor of it, and she does such a brilliant job with this thing. It's absolutely free, by the way. It's, all you have to do is go over to thomhartmann.com and just sign up for it. Sign up for the free newsletter. And we don't sell the list or share it or any of that kind of stuff. So, it's just coming to you, and that's it. And every day, as we're doing the show, Sue is listening to the show, and she is finding the websites for all the articles and all the stories and all the topics, broadly speaking, that I'm talking about on radio and on TV. And then she puts the links in there. We call it Sue's Daily Stack, and it's literally a link to every article that I've referenced and every broad topic that I've talked about. I think you'll find it really a valuable asset, particularly to help you win the water cooler wars. So be sure to check it out. It's over at thomhartmann.com. It's free. It's our newsletter. Thanks a lot.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
.com/Thom. Welcome back. Mike in Grayling, Michigan. It says here you disagree with me, so you go to the top of the pile. What's up?
Oh, yeah. You had a guy, the so-called doctor on there.
He's not so-called. He's a
Trump,
professor of psychiatry at Georgetown University, one of the top medical schools in the world.
Right.
I'm assuming you're not, Mike.
Oh, no, I'm not. But
Okay.
he said that our president, that millions of red-blooded Americans voted for in this country, he said he belonged in a mental institution.
That's correct. That's what he said.
I agree with that. Do you think that Trump belongs in a mental institution?
I'm not qualified to make that decision. I'm not a psychiatrist, but Justin Frank is a psychiatrist. He's a professor of psychiatry, as I said, at Georgetown University, one of the top medical schools in the world. If he says that's the case, I'm inclined to believe him. Todd in Austin, Texas, it says, you disagree with me. I'm getting all these calls. This is great. Todd, what's up?
Yeah, Tom, and thanks for taking my call. I'm just curious. Heard a lot, obviously, about impeachment. I think even before Trump was elected, and believe me, Tom, I have to preface things. I am conservative. There are a lot of things that Donald Trump does that makes me cringe. But on what grounds would you say? You know, everybody on the left seems to say, well, he needs to be impeached.
Yeah.
You can't impeach someone just because you don't like them.
You're absolutely right, Todd.
grounds?
And this is the biggest challenge that the Democrats have right now, is that there are, first of all, you've got interfering with an election. You've got Donald, and I'm not talking about the Russians. I'm talking about Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal. Had the story of those two women come out the week after the Access Hollywood tape, 3 weeks before the election, had the story of those women come out at the time that they were intending to drop that story, that was the week that Donald Trump reached out and paid them $260,000 to the two of them. Had that story come out, it's extremely likely that Donald Trump would not be president, that would have cost him that 80,000 votes in those 4 states that made him president. And it's a crime, by the way. It's a felony. It's a 5-year in prison crime to basically use campaign or even use personal funds in a way that basically it's a crime. What he did. I mean, Michael Cohen is going to prison for it. And in the indictment of Michael Cohen, they said individual one, Donald Trump, was the one who ordered it. So right there, you've got an impeachable crime. You've got his collaboration and collusion with foreign powers. And I would not limit it to Russia. I would look at Saudi Arabia, and I'd look at Israel as well. Netanyahu coming over here and speaking to Congress and all this other kind of stuff. You've got his being a criminal prior to coming into the White House. And there's a long history of that.
A criminal, was he? I'm sorry, I missed him.
So you've got the $400 million in tax evasion with his father's estate that the New York Times documented. Those are felonies. His sister just resigned from the federal bench to avoid being investigated for those crimes. So you've got that. I'm not sure you can impeach him for that, but the things since he came into office, the violations of the Emolument Clause, owning and running a hotel and allowing people to run money through it. I want to know what happened when Jared Kushner needed $1 billion. He went to Saudi Arabia to beg for it. First he went to Qatar to beg for it because they were the biggest investor in one of the largest sovereign wealth funds in the world. He went to Qatar and asked for the money. Qatar said no. So then he went to Saudi Arabia. So what does Saudi Arabia do? They engineer a blockade of Qatar, which is our ally. It's where the our CENTCOM is, right? When they engineer this blockade, a week before the blockade ends, Qatar says, okay, and they give $1 billion to Jared Kushner. Suddenly, Saudi Arabia is no longer blockading them. I want to know what the hell happened. But Todd, you're absolutely right. The Democrats need to boil this down to one easily digested point.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And by the way, those are just the things we know about. That's just the beginning of the things that we know about. I want to know about the rest of the story. Hi, for our book club today, we're reading from Bernie Sanders' new book, Where We Go From Here, 2 Years in the Resistance. This is from the introduction. During my campaign for president in 2016, I stated over and over again that the future of our country was dependent upon our willingness to make a political revolution. I stressed that real change never occurs from the top down. It always happens from the bottom up. No real change in American history, not the labor movement, the civil rights movement, the women's movement, The gay rights movement, the environmental movement, or any other movement for social justice has ever succeeded without grassroots activism, without millions of people engaged in the struggle for justice. That's what I said when I ran for president. That's what I believe now. That's what I've been working to accomplish over the last several years. At a time of massive and growing income and wealth inequality, as our nation moves closer and closer to an oligarchic form of society, we need an unprecedented grassroots political movement to stand up to the greed of the billionaire class and the politicians they own. And the good news is we're making progress. People in every region of our country are standing up and fighting back against the most dishonest and reactionary president in the history of the republic. In state after state, they're also taking on establishment politicians who are more concerned about protecting their wealthy campaign contributors than they are with the needs of the middle class and the working people they're supposed to represent. We're making progress when millions of people in every state in the country take to the streets for the Women's March in opposition to Trump's reactionary agenda. We're making progress when an unprecedented grassroots movement elects a young African American as mayor of Birmingham, Alabama. We're making progress when tens of thousands of Americans turn out at rallies and town hall meetings to successfully oppose the Republican effort to throw 32 million people off health insurance. We're making progress when governors and local officials announce in response to student demands tuition-free public colleges and universities. We're making progress when over the past 2 years, hundreds of first-time candidates of every conceivable background run for school board, city council, state legislature, and Congress, and many of them win. The good news is that the American people are far more united than the media would like us to believe. They get it. They know that over the past 40 years, despite a huge increase in worker productivity, the middle class has continued to shrink while the very rich have become very much richer. They know that for the first time in the modern history of the United States, our kids will likely have a lower living standard than us. The bad news is that instead of going forward together, demagogues like Trump win elections by dividing us. The bad news is that too many of us are getting angry at the wrong people. I was not an immigrant picking strawberries it was not an immigrant picking strawberries at $8 an hour who destroyed the economy in 2008. It was the greed and illegal behavior of Wall Street. It was not transgender people who threw millions of workers out on the street as factories were shut down all across the country. It was profitable multinational corporations in search of cheap labor abroad. Our job, for the sake of our kids and grandchildren, is to bring our people together around a progressive agenda. Are the majority of people in our country deeply concerned about the grotesque level of income and wealth inequality that we are experiencing? You bet they are. Do they believe that our campaign finance system is corrupt and enables the rich to buy elections? Overwhelmingly, they do. Do they want to raise the minimum wage to a living wage and provide pay equity for women? Yes, they do. Do they think that the very rich and large corporations should pay more in taxes so that all of our kids can have free tuition at public universities and colleges? Yep. Do they believe that the United States should join every other major country and guarantee health care as a right? Yes, again. Do they believe climate change is real? You got to be kidding. Are they tired of the United States of America, the wealthiest country in the history of the world, falling apart at the seams with roads, bridges, water systems, wastewater plants, airports, rails, levees, and dams either failing or at risk of failing? Who isn't? Further, a majority of the American people want comprehensive immigration reform and a criminal justice system that is based on justice, not racism or mass incarceration. Today, what the American people want is not what they're getting. In fact, under Republican leadership in the House, Senate, and White House, they are getting exactly the opposite of what they want. The American people want a government that represents all of us. Instead, they're getting a government that represents the interests and extremist ideology of wealthy campaign contributors. They want environmental policies that combat climate change and pollution and that will allow our kids to live on a healthy and habitable planet. Instead, they're getting executive orders and legislation that push more fossil fuel production, more greenhouse gas emissions, and more pollution. They want a foreign policy that prioritizes peacemaking. Instead, they're getting increased military spending and growing hostility to our long-term democratic allies. They want a nation in which all people are treated with dignity and respect and where we continue our decades-long struggle to end discrimination based on race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, and nation of origin. Instead, they have a president who seeks to win political support by appealing to those very deep-seated prejudices. During the last several years, I've worked hard in Washington, but I've also traveled to 32 states in every region of our country. I've seen the beauty, strength, and courage of our people. I've also seen fear and despair. I've talked to people with life-threatening illnesses in West Virginia who worry about what will happen to them or their loved ones if they lose the health insurance that keeps them alive. I've talked to young immigrants, dreamers in Arizona, who are frightened to death about losing their legal status and being deported from the only country they have ever known. I talked to a young single mom in Nevada, worried about how she can raise her daughter on $10.45 an hour. I talked to retirees and older workers in Kansas who are outraged that as a result of congressional legislation, they could lose up to 60% of the pensions they paid into and were promised as deferred compensation for a lifetime of hard work. Bernie Sanders, where we go from here.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you. Howard in New York City. Hey, Howard, what's up?
Yeah, hi. I disagree slightly with your previous guest. I forget his name, psychiatrist.
Justin Frank.
And almost, slightly disagree. But also, I'd like to make what I think is an important point about the Mueller report, if I may.
Go for it.
So, on the Mueller report, he's known and complimented for being a strict institutionalist and a super straight shooter. I think that was a detriment because what he ends up doing is not recommending indictment, and he allows Trump to stay in power, killing democracy, killing the states, and killing the
Well,
planet.
this was foreordained, Howard, before, it was in the 70s that the in fact, it was the Nixon administration. Nixon's attorney general oversaw this Office of Legal Counsel ruling. This is not a law. This is simply a policy that was put into place by the Nixon Justice Department that the Justice Department cannot indict a sitting president. And so Mueller, working for the Justice Department, he was not an independent prosecutor or an independent counsel. He was a special prosecutor. He was an employee of the Justice Department because the independent counsel law expired in 1999, and nobody wanted to bring it back. It had been used to prosecute a Republican president in '74 and a Democratic one in '98. And, both parties were sick of it. And so Mueller worked for the Justice Department. The rule in the Justice Department is nobody who works for us can indict a sitting president, so Mueller couldn't indict Trump. I mean, we should have known this going in.
Yeah. Well, and I just wanted to disagree slightly with the doctor in the sense that he says impeach right away. I'm thinking better would be to get some very prominent interviews, especially prime time on television, to precede that. So if you get McGahn,
Oh, that's a given, Howard. That's an absolute given. And that's the whole point. The Watergate hearings provided enough theater that they punched through the media, and every American figured out that Nixon was a crook. Impeachment hearings against Trump, I believe, will do the same thing. And so yeah, I'm with you. You've got to have public support for impeachment way above 50% before you actually have that vote. If and this is the mistake that the Republicans made back in the 90s with Bill Clinton. Howard, thank you for the call. Michael in Victorville, California. Hey, Michael, what's up?
I want to first say Happy Earth Day.
Thank you. Back at you. That's right. It's Earth Day. Speaking of.
What we need to do is equate him with Warren Harding. That's the problem. They don't teach history. They forget that Warren Harding, the original Republican crook, with his, backroom dealing, is Trump.
Who also had a mistress and a baby out of wedlock.
Well, it wouldn't surprise me. He just paid somebody off there,
Warren Harding?
No, I'm talking about Trump.
Oh, Trump, yeah. Yeah, no,
he probably has one of those too someplace.
Yeah, may well be. Who knows?
Exactly. But besides that, we need to put him right with Nixon and let him pay his back taxes.
Yeah. Well, the other thing, this is a two things actually, fascinating things that this Bob Ney alerted me to, and I'm guessing he'll want to talk about in 10 minutes when he comes on to talk with us, is that Illinois the state Senate just passed a bill that says that if you can't be on the presidential ballot in our state if you haven't released 5 years of your taxes. And there are 18 states that are looking at similar legislation. Arizona, California, Connecticut, Hawaii, Illinois, Iowa, Kansas, Maryland, Minnesota, New Jersey, New Mexico, New York, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Tennessee, Vermont, and Virginia. And they have all introduced bills to require this. And if any of these states have these bills in place, then and Donald Trump continues to refuse to release his tax returns, he may end up not being able to run in those states. Now, whether that will hurt him or not is another question, because they're all blue states. And so if he doesn't carry any blue states at all, if he's not even on the ballot in blue states, yeah, he's going to lose the popular vote, but he still may win the electoral vote, which should tell us something. But yeah, there's a lot of different things here, Michael. Thank you for the call. Brian in Tacoma, Washington. Hey, Brian, what's up?
Yeah, I apologize to you guys if I missed some of it, but I had to get out of my car and couldn't hear it. But the guy called about 30 minutes ago or so and said that, he was saying if the Democrats didn't impeach now that he wasn't going to vote. And I just want to say that to me, and maybe you already covered this, I'm sorry, but that's just absolutely the wrong way to go about it. I can understand using that as a threat when you call your representatives, but you have to still vote, because in the end, you're going to wind up with a binary choice of Trump or someone else, Right. And so just want to encourage everybody listening, use your rhetoric to your representatives if you need to on that, but please vote. Please.
Yeah, it's this overkill thing, It's and it makes no sense, People trying to, I'll never vote for you again, let's just try to make a strong argument, right? Yeah, you're right, Brian. The threats are not useful. Thanks for the call, Mike in Litchfield, Minnesota, listening to WPRR. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Tom, I think it's past time for the Democratic Party to start playing hardball. And I don't have research in front of me, so correct me if I'm wrong. I think the subpoena for the Mueller report it has a date on it of May 2nd, and then Bill Barr is to appear on the 3rd. Is that correct?
I'm not sure. I'd have to go back and look.
I think that's it. What I'd like to suggest is that Jerry Nadler certainly has constitutional authority to enforce the subpoena. And if it hasn't been produced, or Bill Barr doesn't bring it with him unredacted with the support that can be released to the committee, that Jerry Nadler calls the sergeant at arms and enforces the subpoena.
Well, here's the problem, Mike. Unless he's in the building, the sergeant at arms can't do anything, and Congress doesn't have the power to authority to arrest anybody who's not in that building. But here's let me finish the thought. If Nadler wants to enforce the subpoena, the method, what he has to do that is first he has to go to the courts and say, please, put your imprimatur on this. That can go all the way to the Supreme Court. That could take a year or longer if the Supreme Court decides to slow walk it. Then once the Supreme Court rules that, yes, you have to testify, the branch of government that has to execute, that has to enforce that court ruling is the executive branch. Bill Barr would have to enforce that ruling. And he can simply say, no, I'm not going to enforce the ruling. And then Jerry Nadler's back to, okay, what do I do now? This is the problem that Congress had twice during Andrew Jackson's presidency, the guy whose portrait is hanging next to Donald Trump's desk, by the way. Andrew Jackson, in the Trail of Tears case, said, no, I'm going to do this. I'm going to kill these people. I'm going to march these people and torture them, and a bunch of them are going to die. The Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that. And Roger Taney was John Marshall was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court at the time. And President Jackson said, Andrew Jackson said, Marshall has made his ruling, let him enforce it. And of course he couldn't. And then again, when he pulled all the Federal Reserve, all the U.S. money out of the second bank of the United States in order to kill that bank, and this was closer, to the middle of his presidency. When he did that, not only did it provoke the deepest and longest depression in American history, but it also was a violation of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said you can't do that. And again, he said, screw the Supreme Court. Abraham Lincoln defied the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court in Dred Scott said that anywhere in the country, people who are black are property. They're not people. And Abraham Lincoln said, I'm going to ignore the Supreme Court. So these are the three most visible times that we've had actual defiance of the Supreme Court. So if Jerry Nadler tries to enforce the subpoena, Mike, it could take years. What are you going to do?
You know the Constitution better than I do. I think, if Barr is scheduled to appear before that committee, he's in the House of Representatives the next day after it expires. The Supreme, there's no court. He has the constitutional authority. He just calls the sergeant at arms and he goes into the House holding cell and says, you're out when we get the materials.
I see what you're saying. You're saying while Barr is there testifying about other things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think the dates are subpoena expires on the 2nd and Barr is scheduled to appear on the 3rd. That's all. Thanks, Tom.
That may not be a coincidence either. Mike, thanks for the call. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, Tom, not too much. I wanted to agree with Dr. Frank, specifically about his analysis of Trump. The problem is we're all looking at this in a political frame. I mean, that's unavoidable because Trump is the president of the United States and he's engaged in politics. So we assign value judgments, and it's hard to avoid. But if you extend it to the social level or the societal level, I believe like all these comparisons with Trump and Hitler are not quite accurate. I think a more accurate comparison would be between like Stalin and Lavrentiy Beria, or the head of the head of the secret police in Soviet Russia. And, I think Lavrentiy Beria, the parallel to him would be like Mike Pompeo or Stephen K. Miller. Because if you look at it, Pompeo said today he wanted 100% sanctions on Iran so Iran would, quote unquote, start acting normal. Okay, right now they're just obsessed with destroying things to get back to like the 1950s, which is a myth. They have a 1950s mythology going on.
Oh, there's multiple levels of mythology. Yeah, Dave, thank you. Well said. We'll be right back. It's 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
By the way, Fox News is reporting that tomorrow is the rapture. Getting ready? And welcome back. Let's see here. Rachel in Vashon, Washington. Hey, Rachel, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
Hi there. This is Rachel Burnett. You just said that. Sorry.
That's okay. What's on your mind, Rachel?
It came up earlier, the issue with all the various different jinxes on the presidencies, dishonest, the one that never get brain surgery, that Florida refused to do the recount on, eons gone by.
Well, Florida was trying to do the recount. It was the Supreme Court that stopped it.
Right. Okay. So what I'm looking at here with all these conversations, what is it that everyone sort of conveniently keeps forgetting that in 2016 that Hillary and a few other people high up, including Obama, were involved in DWS, and I always forget that other gal's name, Brazil.
Donna Brazil and W. Weissman Schultz.
In effectively the same kind of shifty behavior, dishonest. Why is it that keeps getting left behind?
It keeps getting left behind because it's in the past. It's over. It's done with. Bernie said, okay, I lost. And I think, frankly, and Donna Brazil addressed this in her book, I think that if they had not, interfered in that primary, I in all probability, given the way that the media was giving so much coverage to Hillary and none to Bernie, I suspect that Bernie probably would not have won anyway. So I think that's the equation. Thank you for the call, Rachel. John in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Hey, John, what's on your mind?
Hey, I was just considering your segment on Mike Pence as a Christian or not.
Oh, yeah, from last week.
Yep.
Or 2 weeks ago.
I was just wondering, how you define Christian, because a lot of the views you described, I feel like aren't in line with the Old Testament. Yeah, well, the Old Testament is the Jewish Bible. The New Testament is the Christian Bible. Is that not the case, John? Right. No, I'm an agnostic atheist, but I was just curious because, obviously Christians also hold the same view they hold the view that they believe Jesus was a God,
right?
And they believe in the Old Testament,
right? I'm missing your point, John. The message, the message of Jesus, and it was laid out in both the Sermon on the Mount, which is Matthew 5, 6, 7, 8, and in Matthew 25, the parable of the sheep and the lambs, or the sheep and the goats. His message was heal the sick, house the homeless, feed the hungry, visit those in prison, welcome the stranger. That 5-point summary encapsulates, and love your neighbor as yourself. And that 6
he also believed in the Old Testament, which was absurd for modern day liberals.
I don't understand what you're saying. Who also did what?
Do you agree? Do you agree with any of the Old Testament teachings?
It depends. I don't think I'm not going to debate theology with you, John. Not right now, anyway. We're out of time, and Bob Ney is waiting to come on. So we'll be back with former Congressman Bob Ney telling us what's going on in the world right after this. Stick around. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us is Bob Ney. Let's check in with Talk Media News here and find out what's going on in the world. This report brought to you by goatsfortheold.com and Loving What You Do, Ellen Ratner's new book. Bob is the author of Sideswipe, former congressman from Ohio. Bob, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Tom. Pleasure to be here.
So what, in your mind, are the top stories of the day?
Well, 2 stories on Iran, in my mind. I mean, there's a lot of stories, of course, what the 2 chairmen said on the Sunday talk shows, about impeachment, Chairman Schiff and Nadler. And then also the president's issuing or has filed a suit to stop his taxes from being revealed. But I think the top story of the day are 2 stories dealing with Iran, both of them. And the first one was from a week ago, Monday, in which it got revealed today that Secretary of State Pompeo met with 15 prominent Iranian-American community leaders, and he met with them in Texas. And that is a fascinating, now this is not a news story, this is something that's been verified by 3 people, and in fact one of the persons, their name was used, and they were an attorney, Iranian-American attorney, so we know this is verifiable information. It was a private meeting. But in the meeting, several things. One, Pompeo said that they were not going to use, at least at this point in time, military intervention in Iran. And the community leaders who are Iranian Americans who care obviously about, their original homeland and their families and things back there, they asked about how he could guarantee that the sanctions that were upcoming and the ones that were implemented would not hurt the Iranian people. And he actually answered to them, he can't guarantee that. And of course he can't.
Oh, sanctions are already devastating the Iranian people. Their economy is falling through the floor. And, pretty soon that's going to lead to basically rebellion in the streets, which is exactly what Pompeo and Trump want.
But again, too, it's not going to actually, the clerics will be able to say that, look, we did a deal with America and we did what they wanted and we dropped our nuclear ambition, and now the great Satan is starving you. And they're going to turn it on Trump.
Yeah, because
That's
they did
exactly
do that deal.
do.
And Trump walked away from it. He backed out of the Iran deal.
Walked it back.
Right.
And then they're putting zero for the sanctions, zero oil exporting. Now, this one's fascinating. Oh, and I do want to get to one other point, too, that I failed to mention that's really, really important. This one fascinated me. Pompeo, when asked about the MEK, the Mojahedin cult, which is a group that helped Saddam Hussein and actually helped Saddam against Iranians and actually helped to gas Iranians. Of course, we supplied.
Right. We used to call these people terrorists. That was recently changed.
Exactly, that was recently changed. And the MEK recently, I think it was maybe 2 or 3 months ago, but John Bolton publicly spoke to them. And so, there's been this fallacy out here that the MEK are so well liked, Maryam Rajavi in France, and they aren't. They are loathed by most Iranian Americans and loathed by most Iranians that, like us, they loathe them. In fact, the people in the private meeting with Secretary of State Pompeo, Tom, actually said to him, look, they are worse than the regime. And for those Iranian Americans in that meeting to actually tell Pompeo that the MEK is worse is really something in itself, to make that type of statement. Now, this is what's interesting. He turned around and said, I didn't speak to the MEK. President Trump didn't speak to the MEK. Bolton spoke to the MEK. So, he basically, obviously recognized that they're not going to deal with them, but yet, he couldn't hardly say anything about how to defend Bolton on it. And Rudy Giuliani spoke to the MEK, and Rudy Giuliani was paid, of course, $100,000, even when they were a terrorist organization, which was against the law at that time.
Wow.
So, yeah, I mean, he was. And Bolton was paid a fee, too, at one point in time. So I'm thinking and trying to analyze this, that there is so much heat in regard to Bolton's dealings with the MEK, past dealings with her, and Rudy Giuliani, that even Pompeo, the Secretary of State, now distances.
Do you think it's possible, Bob, that Trump is trying to provoke a war with Iran just in time for the 2020 election, knowing that presidents during time of war are almost always reelected?
They are doing every single thing humanly possible not to salvage this for the Iranian people. Because, look, the regime they're not a good regime. We all know that. But there are certain ways to combat a regime. And, it was working with people pressing issues in Iran. And Pompeo says, well, there are no moderates in Iran. He says that.
Right, which is not true.
Which is a false statement. And so, therefore, I think they are building every single aspect up. Now, this sanction that he announced today, which is total sanction against any country, which include India or China, any other country that buys Iranian oil, the spigots will be turned off in May. And guess who stepped up to the plate? There's some money on this one. There's some bling, cha-ching on this one, Tom. Guess who stepped up to the plate to fill in the gap for all the Iranian oil?
Saudi Arabia. Yeah, of course.
Of course.
Yeah.
Saudi Arabia stepped up to the plate. Oil stock went up today. This is a total manipulation. Saudi Arabia will now step in and get brand new markets. India, China, new markets, pumping oil, more oil, and will make billions upon billions or trillions of dollars Saudi Arabia will make off of this. So my other question is, not only are these acts leading towards a war potential, where, the president would be sitting in the middle of a war crisis. And, of course, you can't change people midstream, can you, with presidents during war?
That's conventional wisdom, yeah.
Right. And then also they're going to make the Saudi coffers fill beyond their wildest expectations.
Trump's buddies, the Saudis, make $1 trillion. Trump's buddy Netanyahu gets the Iranian government taken down like he wants. We get into a war with Iran. The Iranian allies in Yemen, the Iranian allies in Syria, the Iranian allies in Iraq now start turning on American troops. This turns into a major regional conflagration. Iran tries to attack Israel. Israel takes out Iran. Boom, we're in the middle of World War III, Bob.
They are setting the stage with a match that is waiting to strike.
Yeah. It's like two guys standing in a basement full of gasoline, each one holding a box of matches. It's crazy. Bob Ney with Talk Media News. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
Good talking with you. Bob's book is Sideswiped, by the way. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
You know, we put together the coolest little newsletter every single day, or every single weekday, every day that we do our show. And Sue Nethercutt is the editor of it, and she does such a brilliant job with this thing. It's absolutely free, by the way. It's, you know, all you have to do is go over to thomhartmann.com and just sign up for it. Sign up for the free newsletter. And we don't sell the list or share it or any of that kind of stuff. So, you know, it's just coming to you, and that's it. And every day, as we're doing the show, Sue is listening to the show, and she is finding the websites for all the articles and all the stories and all the topics, broadly speaking, that I'm talking about on radio and on TV. And then she puts the links in there. We call it Sue's Daily Stack, and it's literally a link to every article that I've referenced and every broad topic that I've talked about. I think you'll find it really a valuable asset, particularly to help you win the water cooler wars. So be sure to check it out. It's over at thomhartmann.com. It's free. It's our newsletter. Thanks a lot. This is our book today is Playing with Fire, the 1968 Election and the Transformation of American Politics by Lawrence O'Donnell. The first chapter, Seizing the Moment. It starts in 1968. Richard Nixon was in a makeup chair when he met Roger Ailes. Maybe it was the makeup chair that set Ailes off. He was looking at the man who might have been president right now if he had just sat in the makeup chair CBS offered him in Chicago before the first televised presidential debate in American history. Nixon had ignored the network's makeup artist and used a drugstore product called Lazy Shave to cover his heavy 5 o'clock shadow. Nixon once said, "I can shave within 30 seconds before I go on television and still have a beard." The day after the debate, the Chicago Daily News ran the headline, "Was Nixon sabotaged by TV makeup artists?" Richard Daley, the all-powerful Democratic mayor of Chicago, said, "My God, they've embalmed him even before he died." Nixon lost the election to John F. Kennedy by 0.2% of the vote, 49.7% to 49.5%. In an election that close, every mistake matters. A mistake like not getting the makeup right was the kind of thing that infuriated Roger Ailes. Now, 7 years later, Ailes was meeting Nixon for the first time in the makeup room of the Mike Douglas show. At age 26, Ailes looked like an assistant, but he was the boss, the executive producer of the show. And Nixon was once again a presidential candidate in what was beginning to look like a crowded field covering the 1968 Republican nomination. Ailes wanted Nixon to be president, and he knew the most powerful force blocking Nixon's path to the White House was television. To win the White House in the 1960s, you had to understand and respect the power of television. Ailes also knew that one of Nixon's potential rivals for the Republican nomination understood everything about television, Ronald Reagan, the former film and TV actor. Ailes wondered what Nixon had learned about TV since the makeup disaster of the 1960 campaign. Sitting in the makeup chair, Nixon offhandedly mentioned to Ailes how silly it felt to try to reach voters by appearing on an afternoon talk show like this one instead of a news show like Meet the Press. The Mike Douglas show is targeted at housewives and usually populated by B-list showbiz celebrities. In response, Ailes instantly rattled off a list of every bad move Nixon had ever made on TV, and it was a long list. Ailes was a teenager when he'd seen some of these things. This was not the way people talked to former Vice President Richard Milhous Nixon. There was none of the deference Nixon had become accustomed to over the decades, and Nixon loved it. Nixon made Ailes an offer he couldn't refuse. Instead of trying to make Mike Douglas America's biggest afternoon TV star, make Richard Nixon America's next president. With Ailes on the media team, the Nixon campaign was ready to make the move from being the worst TV campaign to the best. "We're going to build this whole campaign around television," Nixon told his media team. "You boys just tell me what to do and I'll do it." Roger Ailes' career in Republican politics, which included every day he ran Fox News, turned out to be longer than Richard Nixon's. Ailes became more influential in Republican politics than Nixon ever was. We have reason to wonder who would be president today if Richard Nixon had not provoked Roger Ailes in the Mike Douglas show makeup room. Such are the seeds that were planted in American politics in the 1968 presidential campaign. Run, Bobby, Run is the subhead for the next part of this. Bobby was a natural on television. In 1967, he was the only potential presidential candidate who could charm a TV audience just by being himself. All he needed was his smile. Bobby was the Elvis of American politics, the only politician who didn't need a last name to identify him. But his last name was everything. It was Bobby Kennedy's last name that made every potential candidate fear him. As the field of candidates began to take shape in 1967, every campaign calculation depended on Bobby, even when he showed no signs of wanting to run, even when he told people he wasn't going to run. President Lyndon Baines Johnson feared Bobby to the point of obsession. Johnson thought Bobby was the only one who could do the unthinkable, challenge the incumbent president's grip on the Democratic nomination. Johnson was sure that Bobby was the only Democrat who might dare run against him. He was wrong. Nixon feared Bobby too, as did every Republican planning a campaign. Nixon knew exactly what to fear. He had lost to a Kennedy before. Losing to a Kennedy meant losing to the Kennedy political machine, and it meant losing it to the Kennedy style. A political machine can be beaten by a better political machine, though Nixon had never seen a better political machine than the Kennedys. Kennedy's style was something else. Nixon knew there was nothing Ailes could do for his image that could compete with Kennedy's style. Nixon couldn't change his sharply receding hairline. At 54, he was too old to do anything but tamp down his short, dark hair as flat as possible on his head. Bobby's hair had grown longer every year of the 1960s. Now at 42, he had the shaggiest hair in the United States Senate. His little brother Ted was the only other senator with a full head of hair. Bobby's hair was beginning to grow over his ears, rock musician length for the Senate then. And everywhere Bobby spoke outside the Senate chamber, he was treated like a rock star. That's what Nixon and Johnson feared most about Bobby, the way the crowds responded to him. They'd never seen anything like it in politics. Nixon and Johnson were both old enough to remember the first time anyone saw fans screaming and swooning for Frank Sinatra in the 1940s, before, during, and after every song Sinatra sang. America saw an even more intense version of that fan reaction when the Beatles landed in the United States in 1964. And now Nixon and Johnson saw a version of it happening to Bobby. Everywhere Bobby went, crowds worked themselves into frenzies. When he spoke, he didn't sound like any senator they'd heard before. His voice wasn't stiff and self-conscious. The book Playing with Fire by Lawrence O'Donnell.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Lori Wallach is on the line with us. Lori is the executive director of Public Citizens Global Trade Watch. Tradewatch.org is the website, or citizen.org/trade. And you can tweet her at Wallach Lori, L-O-R-I, W-A-L-L-A-C-H-L-O-R-I. Lori, welcome back to the program.
Thank you very much, Tom.
Oh my, your audio sounds like you're in the bottom of a barrel. I don't know if we can get your telephone and or your microphone up to your mouth. That would be a big help.
I could just pick up the phone. How about that?
There you go. There you go. Okay, so Trump has this NAFTA 2, this North American Free Trade Agreement 2. He's calling it the Mexican-American something or other. He renamed it, he rebranded it, and says, this is new and wonderful, and it's going to do great things. You've had a chance to look it over. What do you think?
Well, in a certain way, more important in my opinion, is that last week, the United States International Trade Commission, which is an independent government agency that is statutorily required to do an investigation and assessment of every trade agreement before it goes to Congress, they issued their study last Thursday. And what they basically found was a very modest difference would be done by this agreement. And I would say, but for Trump making it sound like it was such a dramatic change, I don't know the ITC study would have gotten much attention at all, because the main attention it got was as an exaggeration. So the ITC found that if the agreement, the modified NAFTA, were fully implemented in 6 years, U.S. GNP, the growth, the wealth of the economy, would be, brace yourself, 35/100ths of 1% larger in 6 years.
35/100ths of 1%.
1%.
This is what Donald Trump is going to give us with his great negotiating skills?
So, basically this is smaller than the rounding error of the paperclip budget item in a very small government agency. So the finding basically would have been negative, but for an assessment that was sort of made up that there was a positive trade gain to be found by freezing in place certain rights for the big online companies. The bottom line of all of it is everyone who has now for a year and a half been saying the agreement that they signed, the agreement as is not going to make the difference we need, but because they made some progress, and there is some notable progress that the ITC begrudgingly includes, it's worth fighting to get the stuff that we really need done. So some of the specific things in the ITC study that were super interesting. So one of the best things that happened in the renegotiation is they got rid of investor-state dispute settlement.
Right. This is these are the private courts, the corporate courts, okay.
That promote job outsourcing. They got rid of that. And so one of the things the study finds is the positive impact, even though all the corporations are screaming bloody murder about having these special rights taken away, they found there's a positive impact. There'll be more investment in the U.S., less outsourcing. So that was good. But at the same time, the ITC found that the rules that would have less Chinese parts in autos or that might raise wages, they found all of those were negatives, seriously. The way the study was done, those things that actually are the reason why all the unions and groups like Public Citizen aren't trying to kill the agreement right now, those are the things that they found were a problem. Meanwhile, they found economically good that Big Pharma would have special new monopolies and keep medicine prices high. I couldn't make this stuff up.
This is bizarre. Is ITC a federal government agency? Are they under Trump's thumb?
It's an independent agency, but I would say they've got two big problems. They have historically made grandiose, rosy predictions for all the past trade agreements that have been a catastrophe.
Right.
So just for instance, with China and the China WTO vote that you and I know has led to a ginormous hundreds of billions of dollars trade deficit, they said it would increase the trade deficit by $2 billion.
Wow.
Seriously. Wow. So they're always off. But in this instance, I would say what they are doing is they're trying to defend the status quo, and then they basically have such a broken methodology. But the pieces going into the methodology, like finding the benefits of having the ISDS taken out, that's worth looking at. Cut to the chase of all of it. The study came out. It's a really big sort of check-the-box moment in the process. It means now the implementing legislation could be sent to Congress. And what politically it means is we're where we were. The Democrats, the unions, groups like Public Citizen are saying you have to take out the special protections that pharma was allowed to put into the agreement, and you have to add the environmental and labor standards that are necessary to stop NAFTA's ongoing damage by bringing up wages and standards so we don't have race-to-the-bottom outsourcing.
Right.
That's an agreement that would be worth having. The one they signed last year, not so much.
Right. So these are the things that the Republicans will not do because they would benefit average people and the environment rather than billionaires and polluting industries and the drug companies.
What's a very interesting situation, Tom, is that that's exactly right. And now Trump is in a position where either he's going to have to make those improvements that the House Democrats are insisting on, or the thing won't get passed.
Right.
So Trump basically signed a deal that gave new goodies to Big Pharma and didn't fix the old problems. To get the agreement approved and deliver on fixing NAFTA, the only deal that can get through Congress is the one that the Democrats would basically fix. And so he's going to have to choose, given the corporations don't want any changes. There's a multi-million-dollar corporate campaign. The Republicans in Congress want no changes. But the agreement's dead if they don't take out the pharma stuff and add real labor and environmental standards. So stay tuned is what I would say.
Yeah. So he's got to figure out if the PR to him of getting an agreement that he can say whatever he wants about is more important than having an actual good agreement. I think that this is probably a decision that they're going to make based on what kind of publicity they're going to get out of it and what kind of spin they can put on it, rather than what's good for America or what's good for the economy.
Well, to some degree, they don't have that option that you just described, though, because they can't get it through Congress. It can't get implemented unless they do the things the Democrats want, because the Democrats are majority in the House.
Right.
So it's to some degree, is the president going to be willing to basically make the changes the Democrats insist on that the corporations and the Republicans in Congress oppose, in order to get the deal through Congress, and then he'll be sharing some of the credit with the Democrats who made him do the thing he actually didn't do on his own. That's the big question no one knows about. But if we want to maximize the chances that we end up with a new NAFTA that at least starts to stop some of the ongoing damage, it's really important for everyone to pile on to their Democratic members of Congress and insist that they get the medicine, the giveaways to pharma out,
Right.
and the labor and environmental standards in.
Okay, so
because that is the agreement we need.
right. So when you call your Democratic member of the House or the Senate at 202-225-3121, what you say is this new NAFTA deal that the Trump administration is negotiating, we want the goodies for the drug companies out of it, and we want labor and environmental standards put into it. Period.
And that the agreement as is, not okay, but there certainly is a changed NAFTA that could help stop the damage, and that's what we're trying to get.
Right.
Because, Tom, it's not like TPP, where if we stop it, there's nothing.
Right.
If we don't replace it, we've still got the damage in NAFTA.
Right.
And we can all do this together.
There you go. Lori Wallach with Public Citizens Global Trade Watch. TradeWatch.org is the website. Lori, thanks so much for dropping by. It's always informative talking with you.
Thank you, Tom.
Great talking with you. We'll be back. It's coming up on 15 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. Should Democrats be impeaching Trump? What do you think? And welcome back. Alex in Edison, New Jersey. Hey, Alex. Thanks for watching us on YouTube. You think we should not impeach Trump?
Yes. First, I'm a big fan, so I'm happy to talk to you about it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Why not?
I wrote out 3 reasons. Let me just dump them all at once, if that's okay.
Sure.
So, first of all, there are not enough Democrats in the Senate to remove the president. He will remain in office and have no less power. The second reason is you risk making him more popular, just in the same way that Clinton was more popular after his impeachment. And third, and I think this might be most important, you still need that single silver bullet in the chamber, if you will, in case he wins re-election. It seems unreasonable to be able to impeach and attempt to remove a president twice, the same president, I mean.
Yeah.
Now, keep in mind, in the 2020 elections, there will be far more Republican senators defending their seats than Democrats. So the Democrats may take the Senate. Those are my points.
So if the Democrats take the Senate and they hold the House and Trump wins re-election, then they could do the impeachment. I get that. And there's a certain very elegant logic to that, other than the fact that you're still talking about another year and a half of damage from Trump, to our country. But the thing that, that Clinton was more popular after his impeachment than before is actually not true. Clinton's popularity went up for a short while, but at the end of his presidency, which was just a year later, his popularity was down to 56%. It had gone up as high as 65%. And at 56%, it was below where it was when the Republicans first impeached him, number one. Number two, the reason, I think, why people didn't respond to the Clinton impeachment the way that they did to the attempted impeachment of Richard Nixon is because in the case of Richard Nixon, when we held the hearings, we discovered the guy is actually a crook. In the case of Bill Clinton, what we discovered was that the guy was covering up foreplay, essentially, and saying he didn't have sex because all he did was foreplay. It's like everybody was like, come on, you're going to impeach this guy over this? And so I disagree respectfully, Alex, with you on that. I think that if the impeachment hearing can actually lay out crimes, real crimes committed by Donald Trump, and frankly, I think obstruction around the Russia investigation might be the least of them. But if they can lay out real crimes, then they've got a take at it. But the challenge that they have is they've got to find one major real crime. I mean, it's bumper sticker time, right? This has to punch through to the average American. What was your first reason not to do it?
So they're not going to remove him from office because there is no supermajority.
Because it can't pass the Senate. Well, that's what they said about Richard Nixon too. And early on, when the impeachment started, there was only 19% support for impeaching him. By the week before Nixon's resignation, 57% of Americans thought he should resign. And what Barry Goldwater went over to the White House to tell him, which he resigned 2 days later, was that there were now, because public opinion had turned against him, there were now enough Republicans in the United States Senate to actually take him out. And that's why Nixon resigned. So, I think it depends on the evidence, Alex.
Well, Donald Trump has been Teflon so
far.
Who knows?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. Alex, thank you for the call. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. So we've been essentially discussing and debating whether the Democratic strategy should be to impeach Trump, to censure Trump, to do nothing, to say, okay, you win. And we'll continue that conversation. I see we've got a board full of calls mostly on that topic, and we'll get to that in just a second. There are a few other things, though, that are going on that I wanted to point out to you. The first comes from the Financial Times. Rana Foroohar is one of the editors there, and she writes the Swamp Notes, Money and Power in Trump's America. And it's a newsletter that, subscribers to the Financial Times can get. And she points out that Team Trump is investing only 4% of the president's Facebook ad spending in the 18 to 35-year group. In other words, among young people. He's only spending 4%. Most of his money is going to boomers. His base are the Fox News watchers, and Fox News, the average age of their viewers is 71. But meanwhile, Bernie Sanders is spending 49% of his Facebook ad money on 18 to 35 candidates. And she notes this underscores that in 2020, Republicans are courting seniors and Democrats are all about the youth. And then she says, she points out, for the young people, 10,000 baby boomers are retiring every day, and about a third of them have less than $25,000 in retirement savings. That's scary. So that's going to, well, it depends. If seniors think that Trump is their guy, but that's a tough one. But at the same time, millennials, this is what they're facing as being the first generation, basically since the founding of the Republic, with the exception of maybe the Great Depression, that is not as well off as their parents, or that is actually doing worse than their parents. And one of the major things, by the way, that is influencing that is student loan debt. We have a $1.6 or $1.7 trillion mass of student loan debt in the United States. Elizabeth Warren just came out with a comprehensive plan to end student debt and provide free public higher education. Her plan, this from the summary put together by Joan McCarter over at Daily Kos, the plan is to cancel up to $50,000 in student debt owed by 42 million Americans. There are 45 million Americans who have student loan debt. 95% of that is $50,000 or less, held by 95% of all the people who have student loan debt. So this would wipe out the debt 100% of 95% of Americans and reduce the debt of an additional 5%, the remaining 5% of Americans, by $50,000. And that's if you have household income of less than $100,000 a year. If it's up to $250,000 a year, then they wipe out $40,000. And it goes on, or at least $130,000 a year, you get $40,000 worth of debt reduced. It's a sliding scale. And it's not taxable, by the way, which was one of the big concerns before, was, hey, if they wipe out my student debt, is that considered a gift? Do I have to pay taxes on that? No, under Elizabeth Warren's plan. She says, once we've cleared out the debt that's been holding down an entire generation of Americans, we must ensure that we never have another student debt crisis again. We must fundamentally change the broken system that created the crisis in the first place. That makes making free public education available to every American for primary and secondary school, as well as for 2- and 4-year public colleges. The federal government and states would partner to split tuition and fees and would expand eligibility and funding for Pell Grants to cover non-tuition costs to make sure lower income and middle-class students have a better chance of graduating without debt. Brilliant. Elizabeth Warren, she's just like, she's knocking them out of the park. Every single week she's got a new one. And she's not getting anything close, in my opinion, to the media coverage that, I mean, you know, Trump is still getting all the media coverage. It's bizarre. It's just absolutely bizarre. So Charles Blow on impeachment. He says, I'm tired of all the fear and trepidation. Counterintelligence expert says Congress not beginning impeachment hearings sends a double signal to foreign countries that they can interfere with our elections. And as long as the candidate wins, he can obstruct any investigation into it, and no one will do anything about it. Fox News is promoting the idea that tomorrow is the rapture, April 23rd. Planet X is going to appear in the sky. NASA keeps saying Planet X is a hoax, but hey, it's Fox News and their guy David Meade. So, you know, on it continues. Anyhow, let's, the tipping point. I already talked about that. Giuliani talking about, well, there's nothing wrong with getting campaign help from foreign countries. Yeah, actually, it's against the law. Amazing. Maria in Evanston, Illinois. Hey, Maria, what's up?
Hey, Tom. First off, I just want to wish Mother Earth happy Earth Day and thank you and blessings.
Thank you. Agreed.
And I also wanted to say tonight on CNN, if it hasn't been announced already, starting at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, they're having 5 Democratic candidates on one after another.
Yes. Louise and I will be watching. That's 4 o'clock our time, and I'm really looking forward to this.
So it's Amy Klobuchar, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Kamala Harris, and Ben Buttigieg.
Yeah, Pete Buttigieg.
I mean, excuse me, yeah. Pete Buttigieg. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be fascinating. And thanks for reminding me of that, Maria. I should have mentioned it a couple times during the show because I think it's a big deal that CNN is doing this. So thank you very much. And thanks for listening to Chicago's Progressive Talk. Gary in Woodburn, Oregon. Hey, Gary, what's up?
Well, thanks for taking my call, Tom. And I just want us to go forward with the impeachment hearings. Trump is running the narrative of everything by all his publicity. So why not use his publicity and his actions to educate the rest of this country on the crook that he is? Yeah. And then if it does get to, and when it gets to the Senate, then I think it is an ideal time that the Republicans be put on the spot. Do we continue to back and support a crook, or do we do something to get him out of office? Right,
and the question then becomes how many Republicans will break, because you know it's going to take a dozen of them or so. And you've got Mitt Romney already, who has said he's not said he'd vote for impeachment, but he was pretty horrified by the Mueller report. And the Mueller report, I think, would have to be the basis, at least part of the basis of an impeachment inquiry. Whether it becomes the impeachment, charge itself, I don't know.
Yeah, well, this came to me that there are so many Senate Republicans that are running for office that they're going to have to weigh the cost to them.
Well, and this is where public opinion is going to count for everything, Gary.
Yeah.
Just like it did with Nixon. And it was public opinion that turned against the Republicans basically with Bill Clinton because there was nothing there. You know, Bill Clinton had not committed a crime. He'd had sex with somebody, which is not a crime. And he lied about it, which, that's a crime, but, people were like shrugging their shoulders. This is a whole different thing. We're talking about colluding with foreign powers. We're talking about corrupt legal deals. We're talking about money laundering. We're talking about all kinds of things here. Gary, thank you for the call.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with more of your calls and the news of the day right after this break. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the 8. Today from Justin Frank, Dr. Justin Frank's book, Trump on the Couch, Inside the Mind of the President. He's the guy who wrote Bush on the Couch and Obama on the Couch. He's a psychiatrist and professor of psychiatry in Georgetown in Washington, D.C. And the book just came out. This is from the introduction. There's no question that Trump is mentally unfit in ways that make him psychologically unsuited for the presidency. That in itself is a truly alarming turn of events, and I'd write the entire book in all caps if I thought that would better convey the sense of urgency with which it is written and should be read. Any number of troubling mental illness diagnoses and character evaluations can be and have been accurately applied to Trump. Both can vary from analyst to analyst, however, without necessarily sacrificing any of the accuracy. More to the point, the true value of a diagnosis is to determine an appropriate course of treatment, and there's no indication that any sort of treatment is a viable option. Trump on the couch then seeks not simply to make the case that Trump is not well, but rather to show how he is unwell in ways that would have been of particular interest to the applied psychoanalysts whose investigation likely preceded our own, the Russians, and perhaps even their American allies or counterparts, who in the long tradition of intelligence gathering examined Trump's psyche and found an opportunity for exploitation. Trump's presidency caps a lifetime of dysfunction and disorder that is not likely to be healed while he is in office, just as Trump's ascendancy among voters gives expression to long-standing trends in the American electorate's psyche that are not going to be easily addressed. However, if we can identify certain aspects of these disorders and trends that may have contributed to Trump and his voters fusing into a shared belief system, then we have a better chance of fostering the kind of honest cultural discussion that will be necessary in order to contain and repair the damage that has already been done. Understanding Trump calls for a consideration of his psychodynamics almost certainly more rigorous than he has ever embarked upon on his own. Trump dismissed psychotherapy as a crutch in his 2004 Playboy interview. Years later, talking to biographer Michael D'Antonio, he described in greater detail a generalized aversion to introspection beyond the therapeutic setting. Quote, "I don't like to analyze myself because I might not like what I see," he told D'Antonio. "I don't like to analyze myself. I don't like to think too much about the past," end of quote. Even armed with a detailed family history, we can't capture Trump in action with only the tools of applied psychoanalysis. Like some of the most disturbed patients I've worked with, Trump is so erratic, constantly changing the topic, elevating the stakes, and raising the volume, that one doesn't know what to expect from him next. It's hard to imagine him in treatment, even as the subject of an applied psychoanalytical investigation. He behaves like a patient who is simultaneously banging in a consulting room window, rattling on its door, ringing the phone, and texting or tweeting his demands for attention. Trump presents so many troubling affects that it's hard to remember them all. In the final weeks of the first year of Trump's presidency, Michael Wolff and David K. Johnston published accounts of the Trump White House that present a president with a startling number of disturbing characteristics. Any one of these demonstrable and suspected traits would raise calls for a psychoanalytic investigation if it was done on a layperson. In a president, in aggregate, they are truly cause for alarm. The list of worrisome, evident, and alleged attributes that emerge in these and other portraits is long. Narcissist, liar, racist, sexist, adulterer, baby, hypocrite, chiseler, tax cheat, outlaw, psychopath, paranoid, fraud, ignorant, vengeful, delusional, arrogant, greedy, contemptuous, unsympathetic, learning disabled, cruel, obstructor of justice, threat to the Constitution, traitor. The list is so long that it can be overwhelming. It's a challenge to remember the beginning by the time you make it to the end. There are times when I wish someone would help us remember all the troubling aspects of Trump's character and behavior, past and present, in a way that would encourage recognition of the totality of his pathology, rather than its component parts, which individually cause alarm before being temporarily forgotten when the next emergency presents itself. As an applied psychoanalyst, my task is not only to appreciate the full list, but also to ignore the big picture and focus on a single pathology at a time. Practitioners of applied psychoanalysis approach their subject as both theoretician and clinician. The theoretician endeavors to piece things together, to figure things out, while the clinician tries to approach each session capable of being surprised, as if his mind were a blank slate. The analysis in the following pages aspires to accomplish both goals: reviewing Trump's record with a clinician's eye, preparing to be surprised by the unexpected observation, and assembling these findings into a more comprehensive portrait. The image of hypothetical patient Trump rattling the consulting room door and banging on the window reminds us that President Trump doesn't want us to see the entire list at once. Not only that, but patients I've treated who are reminiscent of Trump cannot tolerate being inside the consulting room either. They leave my office whenever they feel unable to think their way through an anxiety-provoking interpretation, much the way Trump leaves press briefings when the questions get too close. Trump on the Couch by Justin Frank.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. It's 34 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you. This is not quite a crazy alert, but it could qualify for one, I suppose. There's a paper in the Archives of Sexual Behavior suggesting that, first of all, we know that the U.S. fertility rate has hit an all-time low. American citizens are producing fewer babies than basically at any time other than during the immediate the year after the financial crisis and some other really rough times in the United States, and people are wondering why are people having fewer children. The Archives of Sexual Behavior article suggests that it's because of Netflix. People are watching streaming video instead of having sex. Interesting. Anyhow, not asking you to comment on that. Danita in Bremerton, Washington, you wanted to talk about impeachment?
Hi, Tom. Thank you very much for taking my call.
Sure.
Yeah, every day this gentleman is in here, or I loosely say that, we are in trouble. There was a book that was given to me by my sister in a red state, Florida, and I passed on to another red state in Ohio. It's called A Case for Impeachment by Alan Lichtman, and it came out in May of 2017. It is loaded page for page with all kinds of bumper stickers for the
For example, what are your favorites, Danita?
Oh, my goodness. It brings out all the things that you brought about his hotels, about his involvement in the beauty pageants, about his father. It also brings up that we can impeach other people, too, that he has put in. Yeah. So it's a very easy read. It's very good. You'll read it real quickly, and it's wonderful.
Is the author's name L.I.?
He could actually give you...
How does the author spell his last name? I'd like Sean to try and track this guy down.
Okay. It's Alan with two L's, and it's Lichtman.
Oh, I've got that book here. We did a book report on it last year. We should get him on and see if he wants to give us an on-air update.
He'd be able to spout off all those wonderful facts for you.
Yeah, there you go.
And thank you very much for what you're doing.
You're welcome. Thank you, Danita, for the call. It's great to hear from you. Kelly in San Jose, California. Hey, Kelly, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. For some people, ego death is more difficult than physical death. And I really think that Trump would rather bring down the whole government than lose face.
Yeah, that's certainly what happened with Hitler. He killed himself before he could face the music, as it were.
Exactly.
I'm not suggesting that Trump will or should, but his reputation. I'm not even sure his reputation is more important than anything else. What's more, because Justin Frank was talking about this in the first hour of the program, the second hour of the program. The professor of psychiatry at Georgetown, saying that really what's most important to Donald Trump is the perception that he is winning, that he likes to break things, he likes to harm things, he likes to torture people, he likes to hurt people. And the extent to which he's seen as winning as a result of that kind of behavior is what it's all about for him.
Putin really put a torpedo into the center of our government.
Well, and not just Putin. I'd say that without a massive election fraud campaign, a voter suppression campaign by the Republican Party, Trump would not be president. Without hundreds of millions of dollars being thrown into our electoral process by fossil fuel billionaires like the Koch brothers and others like Mercer and Adelson, Trump would not be president, and the Republicans would not be controlling the Senate. Yes, Kelly.
Real quick, that guy that called about either impeach or don't vote, that's a Paul Weyrich-inspired troll call.
Yeah, it may well be. You know, people who are, you know, anybody who says, or I won't vote is probably pitching that idea to Democratic voters. Yeah, I think you're right, Kelly. Thanks a lot for the call. Don in Portland. Hey, Don, what's up?
Hi, good morning. I miss your show on FM radio in this area.
We're on FM radio.
Anyway, I want to mention something. I believe that the media in general and the government is thoroughly infested with Marxist gremlins.
Okay. First of all, Don, you can hear us on FM in Portland, Oregon on X-Ray FM. You can Google it and get the frequency. Secondly, Marxist gremlins in our government?
Yeah, they thoroughly infest the government and the media. I've watched it throughout my lifetime.
Can you give me one bit of evidence for this gremlin infestation?
Well, the Democrats, I believe that Nancy Pelosi...
No, this is all broad stuff. One actual example.
I'm giving you that. Nancy Pelosi, her chauffeur was a spy for Communist China, and that somebody should investigate whether she is an agent of the Communist Chinese. She being in the position that she was in.
Oh, man. Don, I'm going to move along. I'm sorry. We're wandering into Breitbart territory here, and I don't want that stain to be on this show. Judy in Pine, Colorado. Hey, Judy, what's on your mind today?
Hi. I see it that the corporate Dems, massively, most of the Democrats, are supporting Donald quietly because Donald is doing things they like going after overthrowing the Venezuelan government, by going after Iran. These folks at the top have supported this. They don't support governments that try to help the people. After all, the sanctions were originally put on Venezuela under Obama. So, and there are multiple other things that they're benefiting from Trump's actions. And I think that's partly why Nancy and the rest don't want to impeach. They are benefiting.
I think, Judy, what you're saying is probably true of the Blue Dog Caucus, but that's like, what, 32 people? 32 members of the Democrats in Congress?
More of the majority of Democrats that are afraid to do anything. They look at everything based on the Clinton impeachment. They ignore the fact Republicans all the time taken to go after Hillary Clinton, and that they're still investigating.
Oh, they're reopening the investigation of Hillary's emails. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, and Democrats don't bring any of this up. They bring nothing up that would benefit. Plus, we have a news media that supports Donald's lies by never reporting what the truth is.
Yeah, or very rarely, or when he lies, they don't challenge it. Good points, Judy. Thank you. I'm not that cynical about the Democratic Party, frankly, or even the majority of Democrats. Brian I'm sorry, in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Brian, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. I think if we go for impeachment, we should go with our strongest case. Mm-hmm. And that's the take care clause, Article 2, Section 3.
That he's failing to take care that the laws of the country are faithfully executed?
Yeah.
Specifically what?
I think, well, specifically, there's probably 1,000 things. Just the fact that he lies every day is not taking care that the laws,
Yeah.
I mean, you can put your slant on something, but he's gone way overboard on that.
Yeah, his daily lies make it clear that he's not fit for the office, but that's not a constitutional criteria for impeachment.
No, but what about his tax returns?
Prior to Richard Nixon, and including Richard Nixon, by the way, Nixon never issued his tax returns. This was not a common thing. This became common as a result of the Nixon presidency.
But he's been ordered to it's not even him.
Right. The Treasury Department has been ordered to turn them over to House Ways and Means Committee, which has the absolute legal authority to ask for that. And tomorrow is the deadline, by the way. maybe tomorrow's the deadline for Nadler's. I'm mixing up, or I'm not sure of which request is which, but, because we've got multiple requests now for Trump's tax returns and for his financial documents, but this stuff is happening. So the take care clause. Okay, Brian, your vote is noted. Thank you for the call. Susan in Anna Maria, Florida. Hey, Susan, what's up?
Hi, Tom. It's a pleasure to speak with you. On the impeachment, I would love to see Trump and the cronies be taken out of the Oval Office. But I think in the long run, I don't think it's a good strategy, because I think a lot of the American people will look at it as a political stunt, or it's going to leave, Americans out. And I don't think it's a good idea in the long run. And I think the Democrats and Republicans, or Democrats and independents, should actually go forward and make him insignificant, because that would really bother Trump, and move on and, talk about the issues that the American people want. The biggest thing I got from the report, Tom, is, we've been sucked into this like TMZ reality show. The biggest thing I got from it that really angers me is that a foreign adversary interfered with our democracy. And I think we're kind of all over the map, and I think we need to regroup.
Yeah, and there's nothing to stop them or any other foreign adversary from doing it again. That said, Susan, I'm not suggesting that tomorrow, and I don't think anybody's suggesting that tomorrow or this week or next month that the House of Representatives should vote to impeach Donald Trump. What I'm suggesting is that the Judiciary Committee should convene hearings on the impeachment of Donald Trump. Once that happens, this is a unique event. The judicial powers of the United States are substantial, and they're limited to Article III groups. That is from the Supreme Court all the way down to your local court. But the court system of the United States, and the court system of the United States has the power to demand records, to demand testimony, to compel testimony. They can do all kinds of things that Congress cannot do. And Congress, or at least the Judiciary Committee of the U.S. House of Representatives, when they open an impeachment hearing, they cease to be Congress as an Article II branch, and they acquire Article III powers. It is now considered a judicial process rather than a legislative process. And the result of that is that they have access to a pile of information that they couldn't get other ways, that they can enforce essentially their own subpoenas. And they don't need to go to the courts for their subpoenas to be enforced. They have tremendous power. And this is why all of Trump's allies are saying either, oh, we're not worried about impeachment, which is their way of saying to the Democrats, don't even bother, or they're saying explicitly to Democrats, don't even bother. The simple fact, though, is that once you open the hearing, and this is what happened with the Watergate hearings, once you open a hearing into impeachment, you have access to this information in ways that will educate the public. And once public opinion passes that 50% threshold, and in the case of Nixon, that happened a week before he resigned. It went to 57% in favor of his leaving office, whereas just 3 months earlier, it was only 19%. I think that you would be looking at very similar numbers here. And once public pressure, or once public opinion passes that 50% threshold, that's the point at which the House votes to impeach him and then sends that to the Senate. And let the Republicans deal with that one. And especially if you can get it to 60 or 70% public approval for it. And the way that you get this is by having a hearing. Susan, have I changed your mind?
Absolutely, Tom. Thank you so much for explaining that to me. This election is so important, and I think we walk on eggshells. I just worry about the opinion. I mean, you're not going to change the Trump people, but I worry about the opinion of a lot of people on the fence. So Thank you for explaining that, Tom.
You're welcome. No, I agree with you. There's about 20% of the electorate that gets all their information from Fox News or right-wing hate radio, and an impeachment is not going to change their minds. The people that you have to influence are that vast group in the middle. And in order to punch through the media, fog, an impeachment hearing would do that too. Susan, thank you for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's 47 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls right after this. Stick around. And welcome back. Don in Berkeley, California. Hey, Don, what's up?
Hey there. Hey, something I haven't heard yet is how long does the impeachment process actually take?
It depends. Unfortunately, it can take a matter of a couple of months, or it could drag out for a year or more. I think if it drags out, it's in trouble and it probably won't succeed. But basically, the process is the Judiciary Committee convenes a hearing, and they begin investigating what's going on and compel witnesses and all that kind of stuff. When they get a sufficient body of evidence that they think they can actually lay out articles of impeachment, they propose those articles of impeachment. They go to the floor of the House of Representatives, and the Speaker of the House, presumably sets a vote on them. If the House decides to vote for impeachment, all that is an indictment. In the case of Richard Nixon, there were 4. In fact, I think in the case of Nixon, there were. And Clinton, there were either 4 or 5 in both cases, specific, charges in that indictment. That's all an impeachment is an indictment. And then that goes to the Senate, where they actually hold a trial. And the president's lawyers can come forward and defend him, as they did in the case of Bill Clinton, and the lawyers for the House of Representatives, who are arguing the impeachment, or their surrogates in the Senate. Can present that side of the case, and then ultimately the Senate votes, and it requires a 2/3 vote of the United States Senate. So it'll take as long as it needs to take, Don.
Does it make sense to slow walk this? Perhaps start with Barr, like you've suggested, and then wait until like 6 months before the election, 8 months before the election? I think any attempt to strategize it with an election calendar or politics in mind will probably backfire. Okay. I think it needs to be, the question needs to be, is Donald Trump guilty of high crimes and misdemeanors, particularly in office? Is he a criminal? Is he a crook? Has he broken the law in office? Has he set a bad example? Has he harmed our country? Is that something that is beyond dispute? And if they can establish that through a hearing in the House of Representatives, then it becomes, and the American people get that. And to some extent, that's going to depend on whether the media covers it and how the media covers it. But, if the American public gets that, so that the majority of Americans are in favor of impeachment, then I think the Senate, a lot of Republicans in the Senate are going to have a tough time with that. And a lot's going to also depend on whether it looks like Donald Trump's going to get reelected, because you've got Republican senators, the majority of the senators who are up for reelection next year are Republicans. And, just like it was Democrats a couple of years ago, or last year, or the year before last. So the whole process is, it's going to be no, it was last year. The whole process is going to be a huge challenge. I mean, but I think that the key to it is going to be boiling down the indictments. And this is something that the House Committee, the Judiciary Committee, this is Jerry Nadler's work, right? That he's going to have to do, and then messaging that to the American people in a way that people go, yeah, if the CEO of my company did that, I'd want the board of directors to remove him, or if my, fill in the blank, if my senator did that, I'd want him impeached or removed from office. So that's where it goes. Don, thanks for the call, and thanks for listening to us in Berkeley. It's coming up on 9 minutes before the hour, or it is 9 minutes before the hour. It's coming up on 8 minutes before the hour. We'll be right back with more of your calls right after this. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Elizabeth in West Hollywood, California. Hey, Elizabeth, what's up?
Hi, good morning. I didn't realize what you had said about the previous presidential candidate being approached by foreign governments to manipulate the election.
Right, both Adlai Stevenson and Hubert Humphrey.
Right. I never realized that until I heard it on your show. However, last night, 60 Minutes had a whole segment on how the Russians influenced the election, and they had a graph that was just stunning. about their manipulation and interfering all over the world. Anybody who wants to see it can go online. They have it online.
Is it over at the CBS website?
Yeah.
Or on YouTube? Yeah, okay. I'll look for that tonight. Thank you for the heads up, Elizabeth.
One thing, Tom. Barr should be barred from the bar.
Yeah, I'm with you. He should be disbarred. Running puns here, but you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And this is why I said, I would begin by investigating Barr and Trump and Pence. And the area where I would look at Pence would be, in particular, during that transition period where he was working hand in glove with Manafort and Flynn at the same time that they were working with foreign powers. Right. Yeah, so spot on. Elizabeth, thank you for the call. Paul in Snellville, Georgia. Hey, Paul, thanks for listening to Sirius XM. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I was just calling in reference to the talk about impeaching Donald Trump. The guy is disgusting. It should happen, but it's not. And I think we need to concentrate on making sure that we beat him in the 2020 election. That's the only way he's going to.
I think we can do both. And in fact, I think if an impeachment hearing, even whether it's a successful impeachment or not in the Senate, an impeachment hearing in the House will lay out his crimes in a way that will cause a lot of, certainly a lot of people in the middle to change and say, we're not going to vote for this guy.
If they can get that information, you're dealing with a bunch of lawless people. They're not going to just turn over that information to the Congress.
You're absolutely right.
They start impeachment.
You're absolutely right. And Mueller said one of the reasons that he couldn't draw final conclusions was because so much evidence was destroyed and so many people lied to him. So, yeah, I get that. It's like we're dealing with a mob boss, but that doesn't mean that you don't try, in my opinion. Paul, thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. Judy in Healdsburg, California. Hey, Judy, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. I just want to say urgently that Trump should be impeached, Barr should be disbarred, and also I just want to share one thought with you, Tom. Hello?
Yes, I'm listening.
That I would like to see a miracle happen. And you know what this miracle would be? The one thing that the Republicans have going for them in their party is they stick together. They're like glue. And I would like to see that in the Democratic Party. I would like to see these 20 contenders make a statement that would all the people that would like to see me become president get behind Joe Biden. Let's stick together and to see this next election as a national crisis.
Yeah, I think it is a national crisis. I'm not sure getting behind Joe Biden. They should get behind whoever is the nominee ultimately. Joe Biden is going to throw his hat into the ring this week, and we'll see. Typically people who are way ahead of the pack, as Joe Biden is right now, in 2 years out, don't end up being the nominee. But you never know. I mean, he was a pretty good vice president, so we'll see where this goes. Judy, thank you. Jim in Phoenix, Arizona. Jim, you're the last call of the day. What's up?
Hi, Tom. I had originally wanted to talk about maybe this impeaching Barr, because I think it would drive Trump crazy and be relatively risk-free. But I listening to all these calls, I'd really like to change my subject if I could.
We have 30 seconds here, Jim.
Okay, in terms of impeaching Trump, how about dereliction of duty? The report says he will never do anything about Russia because acknowledging that Russia had a hand in it diminishes his.
Right. Well, that's the argument that a fellow made last hour was the clause in Article 2 of the Constitution that says that the president shall faithfully oversee the execution of the laws of the United States. That he has failed at doing that, and that is a high crime and misdemeanor. And I think that you're right, Jim, and I think he was right. But it's not up to me. There's so many possibilities. We'll continue with this conversation and, following the news and what's going on Earth Day here today. We won't continue with it today. We'll continue with it tomorrow. But today is Earth Day, and Donald Trump came out. And what did he talk about? The planet? The environment? Nah, he talked about the economy. Yeah, those big corporations that are destroying the planet. Aren't they wonderful? Anyhow, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It needs you. Get out there, get active, tag. You're it. We'll see you tomorrow. Same time, same place.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
From you.